Welcome back, everyone, to Lesser Known Operators. I'm your host, Nicholas Allen. We sat down this week with Randy McElwee, who is a retired 18 Delta out of 5th Group. He is now currently the owner of Graciejiujutsuathens at American Black Belt Academy, and he even did some time in the 75th Ranger Regiment as an 18 Delta medic. Great conversation, great guy. I will have all of the links up for his socials in the descriptions for the episode. I really enjoy this conversation, and I hope you do too. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. All right, Randy, welcome to Lesser Known Operators. Thanks for coming on.
How's it going, Nicholas? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Responding to my plea for people to come on my show and have my tens of listeners hear your life story. I appreciate it.
It's never hard to get an SF guy to talk about being an SF guy.
It is, but well, unless they're already in, right? Because I remember when I went to Korea with our team, and guys would just make up the most ridiculous stories. They're a teacher or they work at Home Depot in the electronics department and things like that. I don't know if that was the case when you guys were in group.
I think it was, a lot of times the guys would kind of tailor it a little bit more towards, the fact that, hey, yeah, they're in the military, but they're definitely vague about what they did. And, like for me as an SF medic, we just say, yeah, I'm a medic. And, part of it, I think, is that whole the quiet professional ethos that we were kind of, brought up with, and which is really good stuff, especially when you are active. It's a little challenging though once you move on to your civilian life and you're trying to kind of promote yourself out in the world and do some things there. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, we downplay it while we're in, and then the opposite needs to happen when we get out. But I I get around that by when people ask me what I did, I just flat out I tell them I was a Green Beret, and I let them make up whatever cool shit they think in their mind that I did that I absolutely never did.
Right.
And
I know
they'll
for
make
me,
up way cooler shit.
yeah, for me, it's been a bit of a challenge because you try to market your business and you're so ingrained, especially after spending 23 years doing it, that I suck at talking about myself. I suck at promoting my business and what I do because it's so ingrained to be a quiet professional.
Yeah, but you put Master Sergeant Random, and how do you say your last name? Sorry.
McElwee.
McElwee. You put
Yeah.
Master Sergeant McElwee up in front of a platoon of or a company of SF guys, and you could talk all day about the mission and what needs to get done and things like that. But
Yeah,
you get in front of
absolutely.
civilians, it's a totally different world. Speaking of, so you did 23 years in the military, and it looks like you're coming up on your 20th anniversary at your gym. Tell me about the about that. That's a pretty big milestone.
Well, it's kind of interesting because once I did finally decide to get out of the military after 23 years, I mean, pretty much all of which was special operations. I went in as an SF baby, unassigned special forces at the time before the 18 X-ray program, and then when it came time to get out, I was looking at, well, what am I going to do? And like most SF guys, I was on my second marriage, and I had kids from the first marriage that I wasn't well connected with. And, I had waited with my second wife at the time to, to have our son. And, I'd been married another 10 years, and we were coming up on the year 2000. So I had my son in 2000. I was kind of on the downhill side of being a team sergeant for my second, team, and that was with the special projects team at 5th Special Forces Group. And so I was looking at, how do I do it differently? How do I make sure that I'm around to do that fathering portion of it? And, we had this grand plan back at 5th Group. Had my son October 2000, and, was winding down. And at the time, I was big on teaching military combatives to the guys in SF. I had really, put my heart into it and was doing it, for the teams I had. And then had convinced them to work with the Gracies that started the UFC, and we were working with them. I was going out and getting the training, bringing it back, training my team and all the other teams that I could connect with. And at the time, we had kind of developed this, discussion of I would move on after my team starting time to run the ISOFAC, the isolation facility at Fifth Group. And there I would be in charge of the combatives room, and I would set up a combatives program. And there was even discussion that, I would retire after that, and they would create a civilian combatives instructor program that, or instructor position that I would be in charge of. And so I thought I had it all figured out. And then one morning in the ISOFAC with my special projects team on a lovely morning at Fort Campbell, happened to be 9/11, and some terrorists flew the planes into the towers and, the Pentagon, and the one crashed in Pennsylvania, and we spun up from there, and things went kind of crazy. So after scrambling from that, I got my choice of assignments after Afghanistan, and I came to the University of Georgia to teach at the military science department in an ROTC position. And, they always sell you the ROTC position that, it's a great 9 to 5, you're home all the time. And it's another one of those well propagandized fictions to where you wind up, you're gone in the summer because you got to go to camp and train cadets. Most of the time you are home every night, but you work most every weekend with the cadets and events and things like that. And so when it came time to look at retiring and getting out, I really wanted to make sure I was home with my son. He was pretty young at the time. And the major offers I had were to do contracting and to continue to go to Afghanistan, do those things because I'm a Farsi speaker. So those were the best offerings for me. And with the top secret SCI clearance, that's really what they had. And they were offering me to go back and do things that I'd done with special projects as a civilian contractor. And all those things really meant being gone more and more. And so I started looking at it and thinking about, well, what am I going to do? And I just really did not want to be gone from my son. I'd put all this planning into being home, to connect with him. And so I decided to open my own business. And it opened officially on April 1st, which is probably the perfect day for a government employee to open a business and try to make money. April Fool's Day,
April
right?
Fool's Day.
Government, all that time. You don't know how to make money yourself. You know how to spend other people's money, maybe even waste a little bit of it. And then, now we're 20 years in the process, coming up here on the anniversary at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy where I work with my son every day. So it turned out to be a really good choice for me.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that part. 20 years of doing jiu-jitsu, and then you had the combatives program. That is typical, terrorist attack cancels what you thought you were going to do. But
Yeah.
you were in the initial push into Afghanistan then?
So we actually were, like I said, spun up day one, didn't go home for the next, day and a half, started packing up. And at the time we were in a protected status for a joint chief of staff special projects mission. And so we spun up, everybody got, fired up to go. And then we actually deployed to Tampa, for some meetings and to SOCOM. And then we were kind of torn in two different directions on whether or not we would continue serving the special project, or we would be released and go back to Fifth Group proper for operational control, and they would decide, how to use us. At the time, we had a battalion commander that just simply hated special projects, and which was not very understandable because all we did was make him look good. My guys continually got letters from ambassadors of the countries in our area in the CENTCOM AOR sent back to him about what a great job they'd done. And even at one point I'd asked him, we would as a courtesy, debrief him on what we were doing and and kind of tell him what was going on. And at one point, I even asked him, hey, why don't you come down to the team room, see our guys, tell them what a good job they did. And he just blew it off and did nothing about it. And, really, we didn't have a good relationship with him at all. A terrible leader, really terrible leader. And then after that all spun up, he started putting pressure on our team leader and me as the team sergeant to get released to come back. So he had operational control over us and another, actually in this case, 2 detachments to deploy. And, I tried to tell him, look, that's a general officer decision at SOCOM level. We can't make that decision. We have no control over it. It's totally up to them. And, it was a huge battle, but as it turned out, we continued to work on the special project and work in that area, doing the things that they task us to do. And we never went with 5th Group proper to Afghanistan. We got to go on a few other things to adjacent areas and work on missions there. It's interesting because we actually were in Pakistan in June of 2001, right before 9/11. So, we were in the mix of some interesting stuff, but we never really got to be under the operational control of 5th Group and, the battalion commander at the time, which was probably to our benefit. He really didn't like us.
That's never a good thing when the commander doesn't like you. I mean, but I get that. There's
why he didn't like us. I think mainly it was an issue of he didn't have operational control over us. And, it's kind of an ego thing for him, I'm pretty sure.
No, that could never happen. How could something like that happen at a command level in the military? Yeah. You must be making that up. So that's kind of the cap, or not the capstone, the end. Towards the end, that was your last kind of hoorah, right? Before you went over to ROTC.
Yeah, that was my last operational assignment, and then I went to ROTC. And the main reason I went to ROTC is during that time with things with 5th Group, to go along with that, wonderful experience with the battalion commander, we actually had a team that had a couple of my good friends on it, that was hit with a bomb from friendly fire and devastated the team. Killed 2 of my good friends. And
Davis and Pettitor.
Say again?
Davis and Pettitor.
Yeah, Dan Pettitori, Jeff Davis, 2 really good friends of mine. And to be honest, it really looked like there was some things covered up. And based on what we knew and what we had heard, there was an individual that was basically responsible. And the same individual had caused kind of a unique issue when we were in Kuwait during the retaking of Kuwait for Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. And this same guy who now is, big in politics, became a general, but, definitely responsible, if not directly, indirectly, for some of the things that happened there. But while we were in Desert Storm, we were attached to a group of Saudis that were scheduled to retake a Kuwaiti military base that had been overrun by the Iraqis during Desert Storm, or before Desert Storm happened, when they invaded Kuwait. And we got up to the complex, and as we were moving into position, it was near dark, and these Saudi soldiers that we were with said, we're not going in there, it's dark. And we're like, hey, that's the plan, you're supposed to go with us. Well, this individual, along with a few folks from the battalion command, decided that they were going to lead the charge, show the way, and convince the Saudis to follow them. So they went into this military city in Kuwait that was occupied by Iraqis and got themselves pinned down. Once they got in there and got pinned down, we went in to get them out with at the time we were 2 M113 armored personnel carriers that we'd gotten from the Saudis that were decked out with all the stuff that 3 SF guys per vehicle could carry. And then we had a third 113 that was, one of our team cells as well, go in and to kind of get these guys out. We went in, captured a bunch of Iraqi soldiers that surrendered to us. The guys got out okay. And then in typical fashion, we came back to the States. The guys that went in and got themselves pinned down got Bronze Stars, and all the guys that we were with got ARCOMs.
That's the way it goes, right?
It happens, but you know what? It's really not about the awards. It's really about the guys that you get to work with and the experiences you get to have. So that made it worthwhile for us.
After you get out, or when you're into when you get out, it's what the guys that you worked with say about you behind your back. That's really what matters. And they'll say, and afterwards, that's who did this or who got this award, because somebody's always got more awards, and somebody's stronger, and somebody's faster, and somebody's always smarter than you. But none of that shit matters. It's how the guys that you work with talk about you. And I've found that that's always a lot more meaningful, especially when an SF guy has good things to say about you.
Yeah, because they don't give those compliments out lightly.
No. They got to pry them out of them. I guess we're jumping around. We've been a lot of cool places. Now, you came into the military in 1983 at 19 years old then?
Yes.
What led to that decision right out of high school? Because you're in the post-Vietnam era. I imagine the military wasn't as popular as it is today. What led you to that decision to join the military and then go into it? And then take me through, how did you get into an SF unit? Because you're all pre-selection and all that. So what's the decision to come in and then get into an SF unit?
Right. So for me, I got out of high school. I'm from a small town in West Virginia. And so I went to work doing construction work. And construction work sucks, especially, there. But, at least I had a job. And for the most part, I was working myself to death out of high school. I was getting up at like 3:30 in the morning. I was getting home at 9:30 at night, and, working all day long for a paving company. Had to drive about 2 hours, to work, crossing this massive bridge in West Virginia called the New River Gorge Bridge. They have a bridge day there every year in October where people actually base jump off the bridge. But, so I was going to work every day like that. And, I was so tired. A couple times I kind of caught myself dozing off, waking up with, 18-wheeler lights in my face, about to crash head on. And after a while, I decided, I worked for about a year, and I decided, look, this is not really working out for me. I'm not enjoying it. And it actually, almost caused me to have a nervous breakdown. At 18, I lost like 20 pounds because I couldn't eat. I was wrecked from it. And so the recruiters had come out like right after high school and tried to recruit me because I did well on the ASVAB test, and I had a high GT score. The mainly the Marines came after me pretty hard. The Army stopped by. And so at one point I had gotten to know the Army recruiter because we had talked about some deer hunting spots. And, I directed him to a place he could go deer hunt. He was a former Ranger. And, so I got back in touch with him and said, hey, listen, I think I might want to join the Army. And he didn't really even want to help me. He was like, well, you got a job. You should just stick to what you're doing. I don't know that it's a good idea. You're all set. There's no reason for you to join the Army. And I kept after him a little bit. And I referred back to a brochure, and there was a brochure in there that had some guys, out in the woods patrolling, rappelling. And I said, hey, who are these guys? He said, oh, those are the Rangers, and I can tell you all about those. He did. And then I saw another next page over, flipped over, and it has Special Forces. They had some guys in scuba gear, coming up out of the swamp and some rubber boats. And I was like, hey, what about these guys? And he said, I don't know. It might be for you, but I kind of doubt it. And so I said, well, tell me a little bit about it. And one of the things he hit on was, well, you got to jump out of airplanes. You got to go airborne. I was like, hey, I'm afraid of heights. I don't think that's for me. And he goes, well, it's kind of a non-negotiable. And I said, well, okay, I put it off, came back to it later, and I finally said, you know what? I'm so miserable at this job. I'll do anything, even jump out of airplanes, no matter how scared I am.
Yeah.
And so, he said, well, let me hook you up with a guy. You can talk to him, ask him all the questions you want, make sure it's for you. And so he got me on the phone with an active duty SF guy that he knew that was a friend of his, and let me ask all my questions. I spent probably an hour on the phone with him, and he was really clear and straight up about what SF was at the time and what it wasn't. And I was still attracted to the idea. And at the time I was working construction, but I actually worked for my brother-in-law. He was one of the foreman supervisors for it, and he'd been in the infantry in Vietnam. And I talked to him about it, and he's tried to convince me. He said, well, if you really got to go to the military, why don't you go to the Air Force? He gave me some good insight about how it's a better life, all that. And of course I didn't listen to him. And he even tried to talk me into, he said, well, if you're dead set on going to the Army and Special Forces, maybe go to the National Guard unit that they have here in West Virginia. And of course, I didn't listen. I said, no, I don't want to be National Guard. I want to be active duty Army, gung ho all the way. And I went to the recruiter. They, gave me an evaluation, and then I sat down at the desk with the recruiter to get into the used car salesman approach to getting you assigned. And they offered me different things, but I said, well, I want to go to Special Forces. If you don't have that, then I'll see you later. And I was prepared to walk away. And before I could get up and leave, the guy said, wait, let's check it out. And so he came up with, I can get you in as a communications sergeant, to go to unassigned Special Forces. You get a tryout and you'll become a communications sergeant. And I didn't know anything about that. I knew one guy that had left my high school a couple years ahead, went to the Ranger Battalion. He was a skinny kid when he left, and he came back and he was a beast, and we asked him, like, man, how'd you get so big? What happened? What did you do? He said, well, I'm a radio operator and I carry all these radios and they're really heavy. And so I was like, that doesn't sound like a good plan for me. And then, I really wanted to be either a weapons guy or a demo guy. I wanted to blow stuff up. And they didn't offer me that. They came back and said, well, you could be a medic. And I said, well, medic sounds interesting. I'd watched MASH on television. It looked like they were having a lot of fun. And in my mind, I did some quick 19-year-old math and said, hey, Band-Aids are light. And I was missing one key piece of information, that 100 pounds of anything is still 100 pounds.
Still 100 pounds.
Great lesson learned there, but that's how I decided I'd go ahead and sign up to be an SF medic. So I went in to be a medic, went to basic training, Fort Leonard Wood, and then was there through the winter, got there in November. We finished around, I think, January, somewhere in there. And we took a bus down to San Antonio, Texas to the medic course. And the first thing I saw was sunshine, palm trees, a bunch of female soldiers running in formation in white T-shirts. And, I was sold on, hey, this is the right answer. And then from there, started, went through the medic course. When it came time to get orders to go to airborne school, there was a big group of us there that were on this program, either unassigned Special Forces or unassigned Ranger. And a lot of us got these orders that said nothing about airborne school. And most of them were to go directly to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii on assignment as medics. And, we went to the cadre and said, hey, listen, this isn't what's supposed to happen. I have a contract to go to Special Forces. I'm supposed to go to airborne school. And the first thing they told us is, well, you guys didn't get selected. I'm like, well, we didn't even get to try, So a big majority of the guys just took the orders and went on to Hawaii because it sounded like a great time. A few of us stayed and said, hey, listen, if you aren't sending us to Special Forces, then, we went out. We're going home. And they went back and said, hey, okay, we'll fix it. We got orders next to go and to airborne school, then unassigned airborne in Italy, which I guess was a popular assignment at the time. They just moved an airborne unit over there. And same thing, we went back and said, hey, Sergeant, this is not what you promised us. We're supposed to go airborne, then Fort Bragg. The first thing they said was, well, you'll go there and then you'll fix it when you get there. And the one thing my brother-in-law had told me from being in the Army is don't believe anything they tell you unless it's in writing. Yeah. And so, we were adamant about that. So myself and 3 other guys, stuck it out and said, hey, listen, if these orders aren't right, you need to send us home. And so we got held over at Fort Sam Houston, and we were made part of the supplemental cadre. They frocked us to drill corporal and put us in charge of Saturday PT, what they called school for soldiers for people who got in trouble, and then got us on assignment to work in the TMC. So we worked in the TMC during the week. We had, ran school for soldiers on the weekends, and we were the CQ, alternating with that. So that was our schedule for another 8-week class, waiting for our orders to come back. And at the time, we also got, myself and one other guy, we got attached to a medevac unit in the afternoon out of Fort Sam and got to do that since we were already, qualified medics. Got to do a little stuff, and then finally got to airborne school and, made it through that. I had a tough time because, like I said, terribly afraid of heights. And I got there and I was like, I'm not sure how I'm going to pull this off. And at the time, there was one little 5'4" blonde lieutenant that was there. And, I saw her and I was like, if this girl can do this, I got to be able to do this. My male ego at the time, 19 years old, would not let me quit something that this little female was able to accomplish. And so that got me.
How was airborne? Because when I went through, it was a joke. Everybody passed, and it was really. And they would show videos of like the 70s and the 80s of how tough it looked. What was your experience going through airborne? Because for me, it was just a total joke.
It wasn't that. I can say that for sure. They were fairly serious about things. It wasn't impossible by any means. It wasn't like ultra challenging, but it was definitely serious. They took it pretty seriously. The PT was hard. They were real serious about standards. We had folks that didn't make it. And then to top it off, when it came time for us to jump that week, we had some serious weather issues that pushed us back. We got in one jump, then storms came in, and we sat on the tarmac the next, I think, day and a half, and didn't get to do anything. Then they pushed us through on the last 4 jumps. So my second, third, and fourth jumps were all night jumps, just because of the timing. By the time we actually, got up to jump, it was dark. And then on the 5th jump, I made the error to reach for the ground a little bit, hit the ground, and twisted my knee. And at the time, they were real serious about, you got to run off the drop zone. And so I put my stuff on, sucked it up, made it look like I was running, and then I dropped my stuff a couple times to look like that's what happened so I could get a break. And then I made it off to the stands, turned in my chute, and graduated and slid by. And so I left airborne school with orders to go to Fort Bragg to report to, the Special Forces Q course. Basically, at the time, it was training battalion and a holding company. And it gave me the option for 30 days leave, but I was such a new soldier, I didn't understand the orders. So I thought the order said I had to take 30 days leave. And so I went, and luckily I had relatives. I had an uncle and some cousins that lived in Fayetteville, because my uncle had been in the Army in World War II, retired there, raised his family in the Fayetteville area. And so I went there and I stayed with one of my cousins that, lived over in Rayford, and, hung out for a couple weeks, and I was just doing PT, relaxing. my knee recovered, and I was super bored. And I was like, well, maybe I could just go by and kind of check out where the area is, make sure I know what's going on. And I went by and went into the building, talked to the CQ, told him who I was, said I had orders, and he's like, well, okay, you ready to sign in now? And I was like, well, no, I got to finish this leave. And they're like, well, do whatever you want, And I was like, so I can sign in now? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And so I went back, got my stuff, and came and signed in to training battalion. And at the time, they didn't have a formal selection process. They had what they called pre-phase. And pre-phase was the instructors making up selection as they went. And so you never knew what they were going to throw at you. And it was extremely interesting. A lot of guys quit because they had no idea, one, how long pre-phase would be, because it could be, whatever they determined depending on when your slot came open for the actual Q course. And we would meet and go, we were over in the old 18th Airborne Corps barracks areas. They had a whole section of World War II barracks over there, the two-story ones, the old white ones.
Yeah.
And we were over there. They would, we would have these formations usually on Monday, and they would divide us up into sections to whether we were either going out to land nav, patrolling, basic skills. I feel like there was something else, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And then you go out for a week, work on those things. During that time, especially if you had a basic skills section, patrolling was the other one. Then you would get a swim test, a PT test, and a 12-mile ruck march, like all at once, usually right after breakfast. So they would just throw it all together, and you would go through that multiple times. And anytime somebody failed out, they would pull them out, and that would be it. They would pull us into like another barracks sometimes and do like an interview style with a folder in front of them, and they'd open it up and say, hey, McElwee, I see here, it doesn't look like you're doing very good. If you'd like to go ahead and quit now, we could get you a nice assignment, stay here on Fort Bragg instead of having to go to Korea. They really need medics there. And then, at the time I just would say, well, no, sorry, I'm going to stick it out. If I fail, I fail. And then you would get instructions to go to another building, with your stuff. And you'd report to that building, and you'd look around, and part of your friends would be gone, all of your group. And then you'd have instructions on the board. You go out for the next morning formation, and then you'd head out for, one of those core training events, either patrolling, land nav, basic skills. So then that week you wouldn't see your guys that you knew. So you figured, hey, they must have quit. And then you'd come back in on Friday, to clean up. You'd see them at the chow hall and go, hey, I thought you were done. I thought you left. And then, kind of regroup and realize that, hey, some of you are still in it. So they had a pretty good, a very psychological piece of it, but they didn't have it formalized at all. So you never knew what they were going to throw at you.
And this is just the first phase?
It wasn't even phase one. It was actually, they called it pre-phase. It was kind of the train up to get you going into phase one. And then after that, you would, when your time came, you would start your phase one class. So actually, when I started my phase one class, they loaded us up.
What was phase one? What was phase one then?
Phase one consisted of all those things I just talked about, the basic skills, the patrolling, the land nav. Those were the key components, and there was a section for each one. And it was a lot of the gut check, the 12-mile ruck, all those kind of things that they would do, where they sent you out to Camp McCall and corralled you for basically a month. I remember it well because when I first went out there, they put us into groups. We got out there and they said, hey, we want all the Charlies over here. They had just come out with the MOS, all the engineers and all the weapons guys over here. And so everybody kind of parted, and I was standing there and I was like, hey, Sergeant, I'm a medic. Where do I go? And he was like, what? And he goes, come with me. He took me to the head shed, made me wait outside. Next thing I know, he said, "Get your stuff, get on this truck," and he sent me back to Fort Bragg. And I was like, "Whoa, what did I do?" I thought I failed, because they never told you when you failed. They just the whole saying was, "Get on the truck."
Yeah.
And so I got
That
back.
doesn't change. That never changed.
It didn't change. It was always the case. So once I got back, I went in to see the cadre, and you know, uh, I guess they'd gotten a phone call from Camp McCall, and they said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be out there. You're an 18 Delta. You're a medic. Medics aren't going out there." And at the time, they had switched up the order of the course to where the medics were going to go to Fort Sam Houston for the 300F1, or the first part of the medical training, and then come back to do basic skills in phase one.
Yeah.
And it was because so many guys were passing the basic skills, but then they were failing the medic course based on academics, and then they were having to reassign them. So they were having too many weapons guys and too many demo guys, and they didn't have enough people passing the medic course. And everybody was there. A lot of them were there TDY, so they were, eating up money doing it that way. So they realigned it, and then I had to wait to go to the medic course. So wait for my chance to go out to Fort Sam Houston.
Another
And
medic course, right? So you just went for
yeah,
a basic medic course before, right?
right, the Army's medic
The
course. Now
Army.
this was phase
Okay.
one of SF medic training. And
And
so
then,
while I was waiting, I actually had an opportunity of lifetime, because my security clearance had come through, and we had a gentleman that came over there, civilian looking guy, long gray curly hair, big mustache, and he picked up a detail. We were put on detail with him to go work at a range over on one side of Fort Bragg. And when we got over there, we had to sign these non-disclosure forms saying, "Hey, we won't talk about anything that we see. We won't speculate about anything that goes on. You won't say anything about anything you see." And what happened was, we actually got to go over and work for Sergeant Major Walt Shoemate, who's a plank holding founding member for CAG. And what
yeah.
a great guy. And he, took us under his wing. We worked for him out there cleaning up ranges, doing all kinds of odd details. Got to go into, at the time they had the Delta mess hall was on Butner Road. And so we would go over there, get to go eat. They had a great mess hall, by the way, no surprise. Everything was just a whole different level. And, even though at the time I was a PFC, he treated us all, like serious professionals, talked to us, like men, really mentored us. We got to do a lot of cool stuff, got to see some very interesting things by proxy, and really kind of set me up to look at, what I was getting into differently.
Hmm. That's, yeah. So we got this, you go through, you kind of bouncing around on Bragg. Are you familiar with the course as it is now compared to back then?
I think I am, because, at one point, I got levied and went to the Ranger Battalion, and that was because they were reorganizing the SF medic course to front load all the trauma portions for the SEAL medics, the PJs, and the Ranger medics. So that assignment was designed for me to help prepare those Ranger medics to go to that course. So I kind of understand it, and I know they've added a lot of the things that used to just be specialty schools for us, like language training, to be a key component of the actual course.
Yeah, language is 6 months, and they've moved it around a few times. For me, it was at the end of the course. Did you guys have um, an intensive 6 month language course like we did, or no?
So as part of the Q course, no. I actually went to language school later at fifth group, when our sergeant major came out and was wanting volunteers to go to Urdu, Arabic, and Farsi. And I didn't know what Farsi was, or Urdu. And at the time, my plan was to finish my tour and get out, because we were on Fort Bragg, and I was a Special Forces tab qualified E4, a specialist, and one
Yeah.
of the very few. And I didn't realize at the time that I deserved way more crap than I was getting, being that low on the totem pole. But we weren't doing anything except details, what later became known as Red Cycle. And so I was
Yeah.
pretty, disenchanted with the SF world right away. And I was,
What year
you
was
know,
this?
getting out. What's that?
What year is this?
This was, let's see, like 85.
It's pretty quiet. Pretty quiet
Yeah,
time.
it was for us. Now, some of the other groups, like seventh group, they had a whole lot of things going on in Central America. And when I was in the Q course, actually, I took a bunch of Spanish in high school, and I worked my way into going to see one of the sergeant majors over in seventh group, practiced my Spanish, gave him a spiel about, how I really wanted to come to seventh group. I wanted to operate in Central America, and I gave it all in Spanish. And he was like, awesome, you're a medic, a white guy that speaks Spanish, that's a rarity. We'd really love to have you here. What's your social security number? We're going to get you over here right after, you finish the Q course. And at the time I was in the last phase of it. I was doing medical rotations, which was our last thing before we graduated. And then I got my orders, and just like 2/3 of the class, they all said fifth group. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time, it was the last place I wanted to go. All the other groups were my, vote ahead of fifth group, but it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened for me.
Well, yeah. If you don't know, one decision is going to put you somewhere, and it all work out in the end. Like,
Yeah, it does.
especially in SF, there's so many different paths. I do got to ask you, one thing just popped up in my head. Do you know a guy named Charlie Williams?
Charlie Williams, no, Charlie Williams really well. We actually were on a team together in fifth group. He's big into the tracking aspect these days.
I just worked for him down in North Carolina in after
Yeah,
Hurricane Helene went through. I was working for his company down there in Hickory, North Carolina. So
yeah,
you said a
Charlie and I
couple
are
things
great
that he said. Yeah, he's a good guy.
awesome guy.
Yeah, he now talk about a story, man. He can tell you a story from the sun up to sundown. That guy can talk.
He does have the stories. I was, stationed with him in second battalion of fifth group for years.
Yeah, he's a good dude. So you've you're coming through your first tour in 85, 86. What's in fifth group? What's just normal life like? As because you got the beret. Did the tab come out at this point?
Yes, we had the tab. We were not the first group of guys to get the tab, but
Yeah.
we were like right up there. And then also at the time they had just changed the flash, which was like soul crushing for a lot of us.
So
They
it's just all
changed
black now.
they
Yeah.
went to from the stripes to the all black at that time. I remember standing in the back when they had the beret change ceremony. Um, it was definitely a soul crushing thing for me because we didn't understand, and we were still really connected to that fifth group Vietnam heritage, especially in fifth group because a lot of the guys that I first got to work under and learn from were those Vietnam vets. And so when I first got there, a lot of the senior guys and the guys that were, mentoring us were guys that had done significant things in Vietnam. We didn't realize at the time what heroes we were walking among and learning from. And it was, it was a great experience to have those guys there because there was so much they were teaching us all the time that we never even realized.
Yeah. How was that? Because so you came in, you're 9 years on now after Vietnam's ended, and pretty much everybody senior guy that would have been on a team would have been a Vietnam veteran. What was it kind of like being around those guys? You said as a young guy when you get to SF, you don't realize anything, so you probably just kind of were like, "This is how it is." Did you appreciate it more now than you did then?
Oh, I absolutely appreciate it more now because one of the things that I saw and come to realize is, at the time we didn't really have any privates, and so we were doing all of the detail work, and we'd be out there mowing the yard, by the team rooms and stuff, and I come to find out that what it means to be the sergeant major is you get the weed eater instead of mowing the grass, and I didn't exactly you know recognize it. But at the time, we had these guys, and you'd see them out there. Like I said, the sergeant major helping you, manicure the lawn, and then you find out later from one of the other guys that had half a clue that, hey, that guy killed a dozen people with an e-tool in Vietnam. So you were working with guys that had really seen action, really had a lot of experience, but they were so down to earth, so humble, and they were out there working side by side with you. And they never had to demand respect, but at the time we didn't realize how much respect they truly deserved. And those guys really kind of paved the way for a lot of us. Like when I came back from Desert Storm, we got a huge welcome, a big parade. And one of the things I realized at the time was those guys who went to Vietnam paved the way for us without any recognition. If anything, they actually got, they got the scorn of America for doing the job and doing it well. And then we came back to get the praise for a lot of the things that, and it's all because of the standards and the things that they taught us as they were just doing their job every day.
Yeah, I guess it's good subconscious or consciously to see that, because you went the full gamut from taking the Vietnam generation of Vietnam all the way up into the global war on terror guys. When you're a team sergeant and instructing those guys and passing on those things down, did you think you hope, looking back, that you were able to take some of those things you learned from those guys and give that on to your team when you finally took over a team?
I sure hope so, because the aspiration for almost every young guy in SF is to become a team sergeant. I know it was for me. That was everything I thought about, everything I dreamed about, and it was all because of those guys I saw early on that were our leaders, and they set the tone, they set the standard. And so it was one of those things that once you finally became a team sergeant, you're always trying to live up to that image that you saw those guys portraying. And you only hope that you did a portion of that to honor them and what they did and what they taught you. I'm not sure if we were able to accomplish it, but I hope so. Those guys were definitely awesome. And the one thing I learned more than anything from them is everything is about the team. And there's definitely nothing about being an individual that is pertinent to SF. It's all about how well you work for the team, how well the team works together, and what you guys accomplish as a team.
Yeah. Team sergeant definitely. I mean, that's the key role, right? And you can make or break a team, whether you're a good NCO or a bad NCO. My team time was very short. I went to a bad team with bad team sergeant, and I'll say that's the only person really in my career that I'll talk bad about, is that team and that team sergeant. I had some good guys on that team, but
hurts me more than to hear that there was a bad team sergeant. We all know they're out there. Everybody has them, but it cuts my soul when I hear that a team sergeant, was substandard.
Yeah. And I got out, but that's the way it was. Guys get hurt and things like that. But I really love to hear like stories of good leadership, of leading guys and developing other guys into good soldiers, and go back. And everything I'm reading about you, it seems like you did embody that, because you did carry that on. You've been going on. I mean, and to just continue to help the military and train people and then help civilians and things like that. So I think that's what definitely an impression made on you. So we were mid 80s now, and then Desert Storm's coming up right at the beginning of the 90s. What kept you in group up until that time? Because you said you were kind of waffling on whether to stay.
Oh, I wasn't waffling at all. I was 100% getting out.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That was definitely my plan, was to get out. But what happened was I had a sergeant major, and he recognized that I was not happy, and I was not, in true SF tradition, I was not shy about speaking my mind. That's what I'd learned from the older guys. I hadn't quite learned how to do it with the tact it deserved at the time, but so I told the sergeant major straight up that I thought a lot of what we were doing was ridiculous, and I didn't want to do it. It wasn't what I came to SF for. I came for a more serious mission. And at one point, the sergeant major recognized, hey, I was going to get out, and he said, well, you know what? And the unit was getting ready to divide up and move to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So a lot of guys they were well rooted in Fayetteville, so they didn't want to go with one of the battalions going to Fort Campbell, and that was going to be 1st Battalion and then 2nd Battalion, and 3rd Battalion was going to stay behind and form 3rd Group. And so I was young, single. I hated Fayetteville and Fort Bragg, so I was all about getting out of it. And I talked to the sergeant major, and he said, "You know what? I'm going to send you on something." And he sent me out to Fort Bliss, Texas. We had a thing out there called the B500 project, and the B500 project was a desert mobility concept unit that worked on all of the training ideas to promote desert mobility. And the guys out there, they ran these survival courses for the rest of the teams in the group that rotated out. They used to go out and stay at a place called Oro Grande and do these rotations to get desert survival training. And they sent me out there because those guys needed a medic. I was a medic. I went out and was out there for a while with them. And while I was there, they had desert vehicles, they had motorcycles. And, when I was in high school, I'd raced motocross. And so the guys out there at one point put me on a motorcycle, and I had a blast. It started looking more like the SF that I thought, it should be and what I'd enlisted for. And we would go out on Monday, stay out in the desert all week. We were jumping, we were training, we were doing desert ops, we were riding bikes with night vision goggles, testing every concept under the sun about operating in the desert. And so I loved it. And then my time was up. I came back to Fort Bragg. They were still in the process of rotating and moving battalions out. That's when the sergeant major needed a volunteer for language school. So I decided I'd go to language school for a year, command language program at Fort Bragg, and I would go to college at night and set myself up to get out and go to college when I ETS'd. And so I did that for a year. And I also made the critical choice at the time of being a young soldier, and I got married for the first time. So I decided I needed to be home with a wife, was getting ready to have a new baby, and then, was in language school, building my academic future. And then by the time I got ready to actually go to language school, they had come out with this large bonus for medics, $20,000 bonus. And I thought, you know what? Now I'm going to have a family. I'm married. I've got this year coming up. I'll go ahead, get the degree, stay in the Army, work on getting promoted. And, I'll do it that way. And I'll take that bonus. So I took the bonus, went to language school, and that locked me in to stay for another enlistment of 6 years at the time.
It's similar, your story of your first trip in SF, because some of my buddies that were 18 X-rays, they're coming off the street and going right into group. They had the same experience where they got to SF and they go, this isn't what I expected, or they get they're not doing anything, their unit's not going anywhere, they're not training, or they go to a kind of a team that's subpar. So that was that kind of your feel you got there, and you're like, I wanted to be that stuff you saw in the brochure when you got there. Is that kind of what was pushing you? You just weren't doing all the shit you wanted to do?
Well, that's the thing. Like everybody, when you first go to SF, you want to be doing all the high speed stuff. You want to really be in the action. You want to get all the training. And I overlooked one key thing because I was young and stupid, very naive. And I didn't realize that I hadn't put in my time yet. And because I'd skipped a step that a lot of soldiers had in those days, they had one tour of conventional Army time before they went to the Q course and got qualified. So I didn't realize, at the time that I had no right or no background to even be considering doing high speed stuff. But like a lot of kids today, everybody wants to start at the top, make all the money, do all the cool things, and be dynamic. But I hadn't earned my place. And I was just lucky when I went through the Q course that I got connected with a group of guys, some that were, reclassifying from other MOSs to be medics, and then also a group of guys that were coming from the Ranger Battalion into SF to be medics, and they kind of latched on to me for whatever reason. They took to me. They thought I was a good guy, and they got me through the Q course because I did not have the background or the experience to do all the things based on the military skills that are really tested at the time. And so that assistance, that team concept from the beginning is what got me into SF. And I didn't really understand, or that didn't register to me until later. And then I finally figured out that, you know what, I needed to earn my place in SF before I was going to get any of those kind of things. And it took a little while for it to happen. And then once I finished language school, I was actually the honor graduate of my Persian Farsi class. And that kind of got me just a little bit of recognition because at the time things were starting to spin up with, the war in Afghanistan between Russia, the former Soviet Union, and the Mujahideen. Yeah. And so that kind of gave me a little bit of credibility and some importance that I was able to build on.
Yeah, the credit that you talk about in the Army, it takes a minute, or it only takes sometimes just somebody to like you,
right?
And then you're kind of brought into the group, yeah, and you can get carried through. Like when I went through the Q course, there was just this group of 20 of us, and we just went right through, like as a group. And we didn't know each other. We all just got along, and you just carried each other through no matter what. And then we went off to our group assignments and things like that.
I think I won their hearts when we were in San Antonio because, I was young and I got in with a couple of guys and we adopted the Viking mentality. We would go out drinking every night, stay out all night, party, and then come in and luckily still squeak by on all of the tests and the standards. And a lot of the older guys and the Rangers, they thought that was admirable at the time, maybe not the best way to go, but as a result, they kind of took a liking to me and got me through the really hard parts of the Q course.
Yeah, alcohol. It's, when you're in training, you're on, and you're doing classes and you're on base and everything. You got everything turned on, and the moment it's time to be on leave or away for the weekend, or it's a 4-day, just the amount of alcohol that guys would get into.
Oh yeah.
Is that? I mean, obviously it's the same thing. It hasn't changed now. It didn't change then. Guys just take every chance they can get to get absolutely shit-faced, and then push the limits of getting either kicked out of group or kicked out of the course. Is the same thing for you guys?
Oh, absolutely. Probably even more at the time, especially when I first got the 5th group. There was a group of individuals there that were legendary for the alcohol-related problems they'd gotten into downtown, and and still managed to survive.
Alcohol it kind of holds relationships together in the military, but it is the most toxic part of all of the culture, everything that we have in service.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Especially once you get out, and then you're not drinking as a team anymore. Now you're on your own, and you're using it. You're self-medicating. You're running away from all the other realities, and you're using it to just kind of soothe your soul because you miss SF and the team guys. But when you're there, it is definitely part of the bonding process.
Yeah, guys will just push it right to the edge, but then that's one of the signs you're an SF guy, right? You can just show up and go, yeah, I'm totally fine, and go through, pass, and then pass a portion of the course, or do this training exercise, and then everything's good again.
Absolutely.
But you said, I guess we're referring to Charlie Wilson's War, right?
Yes.
What was your guys' part or not part in that, if you had anything?
So actually, we got to have a very big part in it. Without getting into it too much, one of the first real SF deployments I went on, we went on a UN demining mission 6 months in Pakistan to assist the Mujahideen with their demining education. And so during that time, like I said, I spoke Persian. So we went, it was called Operation Salam, and we were underneath the UN technically, but we sent an entire company from Fifth Group, and there were augmented teams. Things were kind of put together specifically so that we could do that. And then with that, uh, I was speaking Persian every day, so every day for 6 months. And then I also went to a language class put on by the embassy at night for that Afghan dialect, the Dari dialect. And so that honed my Persian skills. But one of the other things that was happening during that time was we were also training various Afghans that were enrolled in these demining courses. We were training them off to the side on tactics and all kinds of other things that we could share with them in order to actually, fight as the Mujahideen against the Soviets. So we had a pretty big role in it there. And then along with that, and without getting too much into it, a lot of the groups, and especially Fifth Group, have these special project teams that are connected to sometimes other government agencies and work on different operations. And during that time, there was a big involvement with supporting the efforts in Afghanistan. And so, I was over there for 6 months, and that bonding that we talked about over the alcohol continued while we were there, because we would go to what they called the American Club that was part of the embassy, and drink every night and then go out, get home late. But the next day we would go train all these Afghans in demining operations. And that was kind of our major connection to them at the time. And then I don't think a lot of us understood at the time like how that would all evolve. I'll be honest, I saw that at some point, hey, we were going to be heavily involved in dealing with Afghanistan. I couldn't have imagined how, but we definitely got into, the idea that someday we would be dealing with them again. And even at one point, I remember after 9/11, we were looking at some video of Taliban members that had been captured. And I saw a guy that we had trained during our time as the UN demining force. And the interesting part about it was this guy was our sharpest student, and during the demining training had a lot of questions, was always asking about tactics. And at one point during the demining training, some of the other Afghans came and said, hey, this guy's a communist, he shouldn't be here. And we were like, we took it under advisement, did a little investigation, and they wound up releasing this guy from the training based on the words of these other Afghans. And when we had talked to him, this guy said, oh, these guys they're just jealous because they don't actually fight. They're just here to get the money for the demining. And he had a valid point. He was serious about the training, but they released him, sent him on his way. And then later, when we were reviewing video of captured individuals of the Taliban during the reaction to 9/11, we saw this guy. I, vividly recognized him. I have some great pictures of me and him together. And, the big thing that we were looking at and talking about was, well, did this guy, kind of turn and go that way based on the fact that we kicked him out of this training and, because of the other folks had walled up against him? Or was he always one of those folks that we were going to deal with in that situation?
Well, it's tough to say if that
Sure.
made a difference, but
Sure.
yeah, that's
It's hard
crazy,
to
right? Because you never know who you're going to run into, and it kind of is a small world, especially when you're traveling the world like we do. Uh, but what's that? That's got to be a strange feeling, right? Because to be there on the one side of the battle in the 80s and early 90s, right? And then 2001, where, oh shit, we're going back in. What's going through your head at that point? Going, because you kind of know what some of the old munitions are and tactics and things are at that point that you've impressed upon these people. what's going through your head at that point when that happens?
Well, one of the great things we learned from those Vietnam guys was be careful how you train all the guys you work with on any of these foreign internal defense support missions. And one of the things they told us is, hey, always leave a Trojan horse or backdoor in the tactics that you teach them, so you know what they're going to do and where the flaw is in it. And during my time in SF, I saw it play out many times, not just with the Afghans, but also with the Somalis, right? Fifth Group trained a lot of the soldiers and entities in Somalia that later came back and actually shot down the Black Hawks during the Gothic Serpent exercise or deployment in that country. So it's a thing and a theme that we saw again and again, that we're training people that they're on our side today, but tomorrow you're going to be fighting them one way or another. So be careful how you go about training them, and always leave yourself a little hole in the process that you can exploit if you need to.
That's a hard lesson to
Oh yeah,
pass
very.
down, right? Because you have to have firsthand knowledge to have that ingrained in you, to pass that on to your younger generation, right? Because something bad or horrific had to happen for you to learn that lesson.
Yes.
That's rough when you think about it. Whether it's that's terrible. Uh, so this leads you into, I assume, because fifth group, into the first Desert Storm. How what you had to have played some part in that, right?
Yeah, actually, Desert Storm was probably one of the first big things that Fifth Group got involved in, and that was known. Uh, that's the one thing about my time in Fifth Group is once I got past that initial phase, I come to find out that Fifth Group, and maybe it's the case with a lot of the other groups to some degree at least, but Fifth Group always had all these connections, like I said, through these special projects and special mission allocations, to where they were working with a lot of other high-speed things. And that's where I come to figure out later that I just hadn't put in my time in order to be doing things. And all the best stuff back in the 80s wasn't talked about. We go back to that quiet professional concept that we heard about, is even the SF guys within the group weren't telling each other about a lot of the cool things that were happening. So a lot of guys didn't know all the things that the other guys were involved in. And then as things kind of rolled out, Desert Storm happened. I was actually on leave. I'd gotten divorced. I was on leave with my kids in West Virginia whenever I got the call that I had to return back for, for activities at Fort Campbell, because Fifth Group was spinning up. And Iraq invaded Kuwait. That triggered everything. We were immediately recalled. And so I actually had to leave my kids with my mom and dad in West Virginia, come back as quick as I could, and then get ready to deploy. And it took a couple weeks after that before we actually deployed. But, they made it sound like at the time that, hey, things are happening right away. We came back, packed up, and then, the bureaucracy kicked in on when we were actually going to go. And at the time, I was on my first special projects team. And the team at the time was led by an amazing guy named Greg Daly. And Greg Daly was a guy that was one of these Vietnam vets, and he had experience, and he was one of the major initiators of a thing we used to have called Blue Light. And Blue Light was the founding kind of premise for the old SOT, or counter-terrorist training that we had at Mott Lake. And at one point it was competing with Delta to see who was going to be the premier terrorist response organization for the U.S. Army. And through some things based on what happened with Colonel Beckwith at the time, Delta won out, and then Fifth Group didn't wind up securing that mission. But this guy was my team sergeant for the special projects team that I was on. And So I got back. We got ready to go, and then at the time they were reorganizing these special projects teams because one battalion that had moved to Fort Campbell had three special projects teams of guys. Two of them were a combined team, and the other one was this team that I was on. And they had newly formed a third battalion there. And at the time, the commanders were of second battalion were really concerned that, hey, we've got these three teams we can't task or do anything with. And they had worked things out for one of the special projects teams to go to the new third battalion and be slotted under them, even though they weren't actually operationally controlled. So we had just moved over to third battalion, and we got moved over there. Third battalion was full of a lot of new soldiers, new teams. And you know what happens anytime you form a new organization, you don't always send your best guys over to be part of the new organization. Right. So yeah. They had their share of challenges. And I was part of this special projects team, and the leadership there had gotten together and voted that, to lobby to not continue the project, but to go to war with Fifth Group in Desert Storm. Understandably, we all wanted to go. At the time, that was definitely the pinnacle. We all wanted to be part of something like that. We had waited our entire time in SF, especially the young guys that didn't know any better about what it meant to go to war. And so we were all wanting to get into the Super Bowl as we saw it. And we got assigned to 3rd Battalion. And then, as it turned out, we were a full ODA of experienced guys. At the time, I had over 10 years of time in Special Forces. And so they actually split us up to some degree and sent us to some of these other new teams to fill the positions that we had. And then I deployed with a brand new team to Desert Storm, and we went to Saudi Arabia. We were located in a rear area for just a little while at King Khalid Military City, and then we were sent out to the front areas to be a coalition support unit to call close air support for Saudi Arabian battalions. And while we were out there, we got a few like reconnaissance missions, a couple other things that came down. Some interesting things happened while we were waiting for the actual war to kick off. So we were basically in the desert for months, training the Saudis, getting these ad hoc reconnaissance missions to go across the border for different things, and to definitely patrol the border and be a quick reaction force for anything that the Iraqis had to invade Saudi Arabia.
You spoke earlier about being a young guy and wanting to go off to war and be the SF guy, and I know I've experienced that because I never got to go. I didn't get to go to combat. My career, with my injuries, I got medically retired and I didn't get to go. But I know what that feeling's like, where you're trained to do something and you want to go do it. Was your thought of what going off to war would be like? How did it compare to what it was like?
Oh, it sucked. It was nothing like that because, I always thought that I would go with my team, that we would be well trained and ready for anything, and that we would go out there and do great things. And not that we didn't do great things, but it was nothing like that. Like I said, I got attached to a brand new team. A couple of the people on the team, especially some of the key leadership, like you said, you had a bad team sergeant. I had a weak leader at the time. The officer leadership was just pathetic at the time. And even though a lot of times the officer leadership has never been the pinnacle in Special Forces, I wasn't used to having substandard guys. And we had some of that. And then the rest of the guys were brand new guys. So I was probably one of the more senior guys on the team, except for the team sergeant and maybe one other guy. And, I had some experience. I'd spent 6 months in Pakistan on that deployment. I'd done a couple other missions with, and things with special projects. So I had kind of a good experience base at that point. but no actual large-scale conventional combat of any type. And then the guys that we had there, a lot of them were brand new from the Q course. They had no clue about really even what SF was. They weren't really a true SF team yet. They didn't understand, what it meant to be part of a team, to support each other, to take care of each other. They didn't completely embody what it meant to be a true professional in each aspect of your job. Luckily, when we did get over there, we had this time to where we didn't really have any critical tasks assigned to us, partially because we were this newly formed battalion where they didn't want to entrust us with anything serious. And so I had time to work with those guys, to get to know them, to train them, myself and one other, squared away experienced guy who was the 18 Fox on the team, provided what we could as far as leadership and experience to get those guys to kind of gel together and be a good team. And they eventually did become a really good group of guys, despite some weak leadership that we had.
What was because I know what it is like now for the officer side, but is it similar, or would just regular Army officers come over to the SF unit at that time? Did they go through a similar training pipeline, or?
I believe, now I'm not completely familiar with how the pipeline is now, but it seems like it was pretty similar. The officers we would get, were conventional military officers. The really good officers that we received would come in. They stayed quiet. They got to know what it was like. They listened to the team sergeant. I even at one point had one team sergeant that would tell us when we got a new officer, nobody talked to the officer. And he was deadly serious. We couldn't say hello to him. And the officer would come in. It was pretty awkward at first because he would come in, he would say hi, and everybody would just turn their back to him, and they wouldn't even speak to him for a while. And he would tell the officer, "Sir, you speak to me, I speak to the team." And then once he got past a certain phase with them, and they had established that connection, then he would come out and tell us, "Okay, you guys can talk to the officer." But he was adamant that everything would go through him as the team sergeant. And then all the best teams I saw, especially from those guys in Vietnam, the officers were really good about putting their ego aside and leading as kind of a position in the shadows and letting the team sergeant run the team, but partnering with him and having that really good NCO officer connection that truly led the team. And so that was the model that I grew up with. And then, during a few times, especially in that new battalion, we had guys that came in that tried to lead like they had led in the conventional Army, like they had led a platoon, and try to be in charge and run the team. And every time that happened, it really, you would show. And if you had a good team sergeant, he would step in, partner with that officer, and work with him to where we had a good functioning team. And the officer didn't try to lead the team; he was sure to command the team.
When you got your team, did you make the captain sit in the corner and stay away from the team as well?
I didn't. When I got there, I actually had a different approach, and I had just come from the 3rd Ranger Battalion, that special tour, and I think we talked about that before you and I jumped on here. I had a special opportunity to be at the Ranger Battalion prior to making E8 and then coming back to be a team sergeant. So when I came back and took over a team, I tried to make it a partnership. But one of the things I instituted for my team, because I had seen some things that I really wanted my guys to be serious with their training and professional with, being prepared to go to war, because that's the mindset. I'd seen it happen a couple of times. One, like I said, with Desert Storm, I'd seen some pretty interesting stuff happen with the trip to Pakistan. And then the whole reason for me going to 3rd Ranger Battalion to be the NCOIC of the medical section and retrain their medics was the result of that incident known as Black Hawk Down on October 3rd. And so when I came back, one of my focuses was on military combatives for my team. And so I instituted that training for the team, and it didn't exactly go over popular with everybody. But I also made sure that part of the leadership process, especially between me and the captain, was some pretty hard hitting sparring so that it was clear about what our relationship was going to be. And, as a result, I had really some good team leaders and guys that really, tried to use that officer role without trying to lead the team, but to be the commander of the team. And it actually worked out well. One of the guys that used to be on a team with me back in 2nd Battalion, right before I went to the Pakistan trip, became our warrant officer. And at one point, we lost a captain, and this warrant officer, great guy, Larry Corrigan, was my chief, and he was our team leader. And we had a fantastic working relationship because we had been brought up on the same team by that guy that didn't let us speak to the officer.
Larry, I know Larry from the Facebook page. He's always
Larry's a
posting
great
something.
guy, and we worked
Isn't
really well together. We had an awesome team.
he's no, that's, I mean, it's great to have a good team. So I'll assume that your teams were more physical, strong in nature than some of like the cardio, fitter guys. You guys were a physically strong team.
We tried to be. That was our focus, and really, we used to joke about what we called the hamburger team. And I don't know how it is these days, but at the time, we had in fifth group, especially in those early years, there were a few teams that were doing things, and then there were other teams that were getting all the details, kind of taking up space, and they would kind of rotate guys down to what we called the hamburger team, the guys that all they did was sit around and eat hamburgers. And they weren't the more physical guys. They weren't the best guys. They were good guys. A lot of them had a lot of knowledge, but they weren't dynamic individuals. So my goal was always for my team not to be the hamburger team.
I haven't heard that one, but no, you don't want to be. Yeah, well, some guys, different specialties, they can run, or they're good at tanning, like the Halo team, or they're very strong, like some of the other teams. But I don't know. My thing was always strength. I was always strong, but yeah, I was wondering when the jiu-jitsu was gonna come in there. So it really started in your career once you were a team sergeant.
Well, that's when I was able to really implement it. I was doing it before that. Before I went to, got assigned to the Ranger Battalion, I was interested in it. I was doing it, for my team. And a lot of times I didn't have the influence because it wasn't the team sergeant to impact training. So I would have a couple of guys that, would work out with me, train with me, and we were trying to develop it. And then when I went to the Ranger Battalion, they were fairly big on it. So they let me, train my guys in the med shed. And at one point, they actually, had me come on board as an instructor for a combatives training that they did. And so when I came back as a team sergeant, I had a lot more ability to implement that into the training schedule. So I made it a regular part of our fitness program, and that's when I kind of started, levying and trying to get everybody to take this as a serious part of their training and implement it. And so I worked with as many teams as I could. I would train my team, then we would train together with other teams and try to share that knowledge. And along the way, at the beginning of that, I got involved with learning Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then at one point, I, as a team sergeant, I convinced the command to send me and one other person to a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu training seminar to link up with them. It was pretty hard because at first everybody just talked about it's just a boondoggle. You want to go hang out with this guy from the UFC. It was hard to convince them that it was a realistic thing that we should implement. And I went, did that, and came back, and then we shared the training. And then we had a couple of our sergeant majors that said, you know what, I like what you're doing. They got involved with it. One guy in particular, Kip Hopkemeyer, who was a great legend in fifth group with us. And then along with that, we had another guy, sergeant major named Joe Alter, who's since passed away. But these guys were big on this individual fighting spirit and putting it into the team. And they were okay with my guys walking around with black eyes from training. And they saw that we were training. They would come train with us. And they kind of really took to what we were doing and saw how it brought our team together. So as a result, they were pretty supportive of it.
Yeah, guys take, especially SF guys, they take to combat stuff like that pretty well, and being, anything to get one up over on the other guys or something, or learn something new, or
Right.
just to be that much more dangerous. Because you got a lot of skills as an SF guy: running, shooting, fighting, jumping out of planes, all that other stuff. Anything to make you more dangerous.
Absolutely. Some
Um,
guys take to it, other guys kind of shun it, because especially a lot of the guys that are in really good shape, they're in the gym, their idea is, more speed, surprise, violence of action. And when I first started, that's kind of where I was too, until I kind of got connected with the Gracies and I saw that none of that worked against them. And they, just flung me around like a helpless child. And so that's when I figured out I need to kind of learn some of this.
yeah, yeah. I mean, uh, I'm a big guy. I'm very strong, and people. I know what people think when they see me, that I'm, oh, that's a tough guy. And in reality, I'm not at all. Like, I'm a good wrestler, and I'm very strong, but I'm not good in a fight. I got so many concussions, I can't get hit anymore. I just go down. So I got a wrestling background, but man, if you get just a normal person with uh, that's got a black background in jujitsu, they'll tie you up and make you feel like a child.
Yeah, a lot of the big guys, I mean, you can't discount that. And we had several guys in SF. Larry was one of them. That's a pretty big guy that, they're just fighters. They've got that inherent violent instinct, and they'll throw down with you and make your life hard. But there's a difference in, having the training and being able to actually do it with skill that really makes a big difference. And I was attracted to that, and have since really learned the value of it and seen that it is something that's really useful, especially for SF teams.
No, it is, and you're seeing now the more popular it's becoming, because as well, you said the Gracies, right, started UFC and everything. It's crazy where that started and where it is now, and
Unbelievable.
yeah, absolutely unbelievable. And the popularity, people opening up Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gyms. There's one just opened not too far from here. You've had yours for 20 years. Uh,
Yeah.
what have you noticed that the interest from the public over the last 20 years has been? Has it
So one of
or
the
has
things, yeah, one of the things we've noticed is it's really grown in popularity, but it's actually also evolved in the way it's presented. It's gotten um, it's kind of evolved to a point to where in some ways it's disheartening, because when I started because I saw that lethality portion and that way to add it in as another tool or another weapon in my arsenal as an SF guy. Well, over the years, it's become really popularized by the sport aspect. And so one of the things we see nowadays is it's very much a sport activity. And a lot of it is it's competition based, so it doesn't take into account the idea of punches and strikes, and so it's
hmm,
become, in some ways, this entity that teaches bad habits for actual combat. And I've even seen it with some of the combatives training programs. Is some of the guys, they have civilian guys that are coming in and training them. They're in shorts and t-shirts instead of in ACUs, BDUs, or in uniform, which is what you should be operating in, what you should be training in, with the train as you fight concept that was just beat into us by the Vietnam guys. And they're doing these techniques that if you do them in a fight, all I have to do is punch you. But because with their training, there's no punching in competition. So one of the things we've made sure we've stayed true to is keeping the punches in the training and making sure we train that to even our civilians that are coming through and working on it, so that they understand that it's easy for you to actually get punched when you're trying to do some of these sportive moves, and that could end the whole fight for you. So we like to focus on those very basic things. And I tell everybody that's really the difference between special forces and the rest of the army is we were always taught to be brilliant at the basics. And being
Yeah.
brilliant at the basics in a fight is realizing that the first thing somebody wants to do is punch you in the face. So you got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, you hit somebody even just in the throat. I mean, that's going to end a lot of fights really fast when the person can't breathe, and then you can just
Right.
walk away. Or the hardest skill to learn in fighting is to not let the fight start entirely.
Yeah,
Is
that's a key.
is is we as our ego side or whatever it is, uh, two people getting after it, where the one person can just, hey, I can just de-escalate this real quick and not even have to fight this person or even have to use my training. Do you
Yeah, we
think
learned that.
that's ignored? Do you think that's ignored a lot more as well too?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things, and I attribute it back to the Vietnam guys, one of the things they taught us was, don't initiate fire unless you're ready to receive fire. And, they used to always say, we had one guy that used to say, don't chase a band of Indians that just stole a Gatling gun. And so the lesson that they taught with that was we're supposed to be a small elite unit. You don't want to initiate fire on a much larger element that has a lot more firepower than you, or an element that you don't know is connected to one of those larger units unless you have to. So don't be quick to start something that you're not ready to engage in. And that's always kind of stuck with me, especially on the one-on-one fighting side. It's a crucial
Yeah,
skill that we try to make sure we teach our students is that, the fight is not your go-to option. You don't want to get physical or get dusty on the ground unless you have to.
yeah, it should be the last option. But somebody said, uh, but when diplomacy fails, lead with your right fist.
Absolutely.
Um, I want to talk more about Ranger Regiment. So you're 18 series guy, and it's the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So you're at the height of, you're pretty experienced 18 Delta in group, and you get to move over to Ranger Regiment, which is the most regular, which is the most proper of all the special operations units. What,
ultra
what
ultra conventional.
you talk about good at the basics. This is the best infantry unit in the Army, and
Absolutely.
Rangers love the Rangers. So you're going from hands in your pockets, Green Beret on Fort Bragg, and now you're going to 375. What was that like?
So actually, I went from Fort Campbell because we were at Fort
Oh, I'm
Campbell
sorry.
for,
I'm sorry. Yeah, you moved. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and the year was 1995. Um, right after the October 3rd, 1993 incident, General Downing had decided that he wanted his Ranger medics to be more highly trained in order to support their role in special operations. And to do that, the Q course was rearranged or was in the process of being reordered so that the trauma medicine would be front loaded and that all special operations medics and corpsmen could attend, to include corpsmen from the SEALs, medics from the Rangers, and then it was still the first phase now of the medic training. And to accomplish this in the interim, he got um, a SF medic to be assigned to each Ranger company. And so there were 4 at each Ranger battalion.
Hmm.
And like I said, this was a little bit after Desert Storm. And I had been on a protected status from being levied and being PCSed anywhere from my time on that first special projects team. And I came down on orders for civil affairs at Fort Bragg. And probably 2 of the things that in my mind were the worst possible things ever. First and foremost, Fort Bragg. I did not want to go back to Fayetteville. I had no love for the place other than going to school. And then secondly, civil affairs. That did not embody my idea of being in special forces. I did not want to do it. I did not like the idea. It didn't fit where I wanted to be in special forces. And so I tried to get out of the assignment. And at one point previously, I had been spoken to by the guys from CAG about trying to be a support medic. So I called them up and said, hey, I'd like to see if I could go to selection to be a support medic. And they're like, hey, I'm sorry, you're too senior. We just don't want you. And,
Mm.
I was a senior E7 at the time. So I understood.
Do you think about that now? What if because I talk to guys and they kind of wish they would have at least tried or tried to go to Delta or go to selection at least. Do you think about that? How you if you had the chance when you were younger about going, if that's something you would have wanted to do?
Well, absolutely. I think about it, but at the time, I finally got into my stride in special forces and liked what I was doing so well with a lot of the things that I kind of put it out of my mind. I didn't think about it. And then, I I brought it up when I had no other choice, which is exactly why I would have turned me down too, because
Yeah,
it's not an area. And having worked with those guys, it's not a unit that should be your second choice. You should absolutely want to be there wholeheartedly. And truth be told, I was a physical young guy, but I don't know if I could have made it. It's a very tough assignment. They got a really tough selection, and I don't know how I would have done. But I always look back sometimes and say, you know what, I think I would have enjoyed that. Maybe I should have given it a try. But I don't look at it as anything that was missed out, because everything for me kind of became exactly what I thought it would be eventually with SF. And I had a great time in fifth group. It really worked out well. But you always think back that was one more thing that I really would have liked to try.
yeah, yeah. It's something, right? Because it's just that next. We've said this before. It's that next level. You want to try that next thing, and you always want to know if you'd have been able to do it. I don't know if I'd have been able to do it. If I know have some friends that went and did it, but I don't know if I could have done it. Maybe,
Right?
maybe not. So, but
You never know. And luckily, when I took that assignment to the Ranger Battalion, like I said, I was on orders for civil affairs. I called Branch, tried to finagle anything else, and the guy at the time said, "There's no way you're getting out of this assignment." And that's the last thing you want to say to an SF guy, especially
yeah,
somebody who's in his heart wholeheartedly SF. And so I started looking for ways out of it, and I found this assignment at the Ranger Battalion. There had been a guy who had served at with Seventh Group at the School of Americas, and he had kind of wiggled his way over to the Ranger Battalion at Third Battalion, and when that slot came open, and really hadn't done a very good job. He had failed physically a lot of their stuff, including their test to go to for him to go to Ranger School. I'm not sure how he did on like their selection process. So I contacted the guy in charge of that assignment and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this. What can you tell me about it?" And the guy asked me, he said, "Well, can you do pull-ups?" And I said, "Well, how many?" And he said, "6." And I said, "Heck, I can do 10." And he asked me about running. He said, "Well, how well do you run?" And I'm not a great runner. I said, "Well, what are we talking?" He said, 5 miles in 40 minutes. I said, "Well, yeah, I could probably do that." And then the last thing was he said, "Well, can you ruck?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I could definitely ruck. How far are you talking?" He said 12 miles. And at the time, we had the annual certification that had a 20-mile requirement. And I was like, "I can absolutely do that. 20 miles rucking is probably one of the things I do best." And then, so I went to I took the assignment on a probationary clause that I had to pass their rope, their Ranger orientation program. So I went to Fort Benning, passed rope, got assigned there. And then that actually worked out for me to get to interact more with the CAG guys. Because while I was there, at one point, there was an operation where they required a liaison, an L&O position from the Rangers, and it was medically related. So I got chosen to do that. And then once I worked with them and interacted on that, they were requesting me for a lot of joint training things after that. And so it worked out really well for me to get some great experience and to see really just how impressive those guys are, and to a little bit of a wake up call that, hey, maybe I wouldn't have been able to pass their selection or their training, because they really are, the tip of the spear and the elite part of the process.
yeah. But that says a lot, though. That's got to feel good if those guys are asking you to come out and support them. That's got to feel pretty good, though.
I think a lot of it was that I was an SF guy. I was a little more mature. I'd learned a little bit about building rapport and when to be quiet, when not to say something, maybe how to say it differently. And so when I interacted with them, I think they recognized some of that. and just gave me the opportunity to do more things at that level. And the Ranger Battalion, huge experience for me. Like you said, they are the elite infantry unit, and at the time they were ultra conventional. They had this special operations support mission that was direct support and made them a tier 1 unit. But their clientele, or not their clientele, but they're consisting of all these young Rangers, E1s. Yeah. There's a lot of young soldiers that make up the Ranger Battalion. And so as a result, they need these very strict approach to everything so that they can function at that level. And they are definitely serious about being very strict. And it was a real eye opener for me as a 10-year plus veteran of Special Forces to go to the Ranger Regiment. And they required us to get the Ranger haircut, to wear the black beret. We were, wholeheartedly supposed to be Rangers. And there was even there was a sidewalk that went from the medical building where I was, working at, to the headquarters section that I had to go to frequently, especially to attend all the staff meetings and things like that. And there was a sidewalk that went all along the buildings. And we used to call it, the SF guys and I used to call it the Walk of Scow, because everybody that walked along there, had this stern Ranger face. Everybody was like, Rangers lead the way. We're SF guys. We're used to going, hey, how's it going? And
you want to go get a beer?
At all.
So this is 95. They got black berets. You didn't get to wear your green beret. You had to wear the black beret.
There was no green beret there. They did not take to that at all. They were adamant that you will be, wearing the black beret. All the Ranger standards were in effect. High and tights every Monday. Spit shine boots, starch uniforms. It was all 100% Rangers lead the way all the way.
Did you at least, or not? I mean, at least, but most guys didn't. But did you have a Ranger tab to have curry some favor with them, or no?
No. No. So to add insult to injury,
you had a special for a blue tab, and they've got the yellow and black.
Exactly. Yeah. And part of the deal when I first went there was I was supposed to get to go to Ranger School. And so while I was there, and immediately I did take some heat from them, especially, like I said, when I first showed up, they had 2 SF guys in that position before. One of them, I think he was from 3rd group or something, had gotten in trouble and actually sent to a military correction facility for having ammo and explosives in his shed at the house. So he was a criminal.
Is that bad? That sounds bad.
They thought so. And like I said, the second guy could not pass or meet their physical standards. So they were really down on the SF community at the time. And so when I showed up, I didn't know all of this. I had no idea. I was there to fill the position, be the professional I was trained to be, and I was taking a lot of ribbing right away. And even in rope, there were some challenges thrown out. They have one day there where it's supposed to be all senior NCOs or E5s and above at least, and they had one day where we were out for PT. It was near the end, and you're supposed to play volleyball, but it was in like a sand pit volleyball court that they have there. And this quickly became king of the pit. Well, I was a little senior. To be honest, by that time, it was a physical course. And so I was tired. My bones hurt a little bit. So I was kind of staying off to the side watching as this evolved. And they had a young lieutenant that was kind of goading me into doing, being involved. And I was like, oh, sorry, you know what? I really don't want to do that. And then he eventually prodded me enough that we did, get into a little confrontation. And I actually choked him out and threw him face down into the sand pit and walked off. And with that, I kind of established my Ranger brand. And after that, I implemented the combatives into training for the medics at the medical section, and knocked out a couple kids. Had some pretty intense training for them. And so some of the questioning of my background and fitness to be there subsided a little bit. But even in one meeting, my first company training meeting that I attended, one of the guys, the commander introduced me as, Sergeant First Class McElwee from Special Forces, now running the head shed in the medic section. And one of the guys said, well, what kind of criminal are you? And being an SF guy, I hadn't adjusted just yet. I fired back and I said, well, I'm a murderer. I just haven't been caught yet. And so, they didn't really welcome me very much in the beginning, but eventually we kind of achieved an understanding and got to where they were okay. But they used to give me a hard time about not having the Ranger tab. And they would say, hey, you don't have a Ranger tab. And I would even tell them, I said, well, I don't need that. I got the tab. And so,
Yeah.
it was some playful fun, but I definitely took some ribbing over it.
Yeah, that's the big thing. If you don't mix, everybody's a sergeant with a Ranger tab and Ranger regiment, and most specialists have them too. So that was your like first exposure to a regular Army structured unit, right? Because
Right. I
prior to
did it.
that, you were, yeah, um, and our formations are nothing like theirs. Um,
No, they actually march and do drill and ceremony. And as the NCOIC, you're sometimes expected to lead that. You talk about being a mess and being out of my element. I was definitely out of my element with that.
yeah, I mean, if you don't do drill and ceremony for 10 years, you're not really gonna know how to do it.
Right.
So so you're 30 about this time. How long was that assignment for? 2 years?
It was a 2 year assignment. And actually, during that time, uh, I went to O&I school. And that's actually what happened that prevented me from going to Ranger school because I was set to go. And they came down and they wanted to send the doctor from the medical section. They wanted him to be Ranger qualified. And I said, well, he's here before me. Yes. Okay. He should go. And then it came down to I had a choice to make, either go to Ranger school or go to O&I. And for me, O&I was my promotion to E8. And I knew, hey, I need to go to O&I at Fort Bragg. And so I chose to go to O&I.
What's O&I again?
Operations and Intelligence. It's the 18 Fox course, or was at the time. I'm not sure how it all
I think we
happened.
just call it the I think we just call it the Fox course now. It might
Could
still
be,
have that name, but everything gets dumbed down over the years.
right. Yeah. And
So
so I went there for 4 months out of my 2 years.
what what was the biggest like takeaway from going to serve or be in Ranger Battalion that you had while you were there?
Well, if anything, it forced me to, one, to really make sure I knew my tactics, because a lot of times as a medic in SF, you've got no requirement to be ultra tactically sound. Now, I was always interested in that part, always took a real attraction to it anyway. So I really delved into it as much as I could. But when I got to the Ranger Regiment, I had to lead those guys like somebody that had graduated Ranger School would. So I had to know the Ranger Handbook. I had to know basic patrolling, and I had to do a good job at it no matter what I was doing. And so more than anything, what I took away from it was just reinforcements of that, being brilliant at the basics, being ultra professional, and really, trying to be that leadership example, especially for all those young Rangers there as an SF guy. Because while I was there, I come to realize that I wasn't just there as a senior NCO. I was there representing all of Special Forces. And these guys that had come before me had already stained our reputation. And to me, that, that really kind of bothered me because I knew that even though we laugh and joke and cut up and everything, the guys that I knew from Special Forces, starting with those Vietnam vets, were the most professional, most proficient guys I'd ever seen in the Army. And I did not
Yeah.
want to, let them down in what I was taught and in representing them at the Ranger Battalion.
Yeah. Um, More so than I think any other unit in the military. If you meet one shitbag Green Beret, it taints it for everybody else.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I was a private on Fort Sill, and one day the section leader said, "Who wants to do a board?" And it's like, I don't know what that is, but I'll do it. Because I got out of work or something. So I got to go home and study. And then I went to the board and I won. Well, I didn't know that if you win, you had to keep going to boards until you lost. So
Right.
I come in one day. He's like, "Oh, we got another board coming up because you won." Oh no, fuck. So anyway, back to study. So I get all the way up to post level, and I don't know if this was the post sergeant major or it was the training side sergeant major. It might have been the training side sergeant major. And this guy just he once he found out I wanted to go be an SF guy, he just was the questions just seemed mean, and he tried to hitch me up on stuff. And I was like, I didn't understand why he was being like that. And I come to find out, I went to this gym and there was an officer there that went there that was on his command team. And he goes, "Oh, he hates SF guys. He thinks they're the worst soldiers that there are. He thinks they're unprofessional." I said, "Oh,
Right.
well, I guess he's been in all this time. He's probably met, so now looking back now, he probably met a couple that were just ate up shitbags. And that's the impression he got, is they're unprofessional and this. So yeah, you get a bad SF guy that goes to Ranger Battalion, and that's going to skew everybody there. They're going to think you're the worst. And then more off, when I went to selection, the guys at selection that were from Ranger Battalion, they're the ones that tried the absolute hardest. They were trying the hardest because they knew when they got back to battalion, they were getting kicked out.
Oh yeah, you better pass if you're leaving the regiment, Ranger Regiment, to go to SF, because otherwise you burnt your bridges. You know,
Yeah.
they are definitely not going to welcome you back.
There was one guy when I went through, he must have torn his ACL or something in selection. And this dude was Captain America, massive, built. He was killing the runs, the rucks, land nav, everything. I mean, and when he was on the back of that truck, you could just see in his face, he's like, "I am fucked because now I'm hurt and I got to go back to battalion and get kicked out. And then
Right.
hopefully I can go to CAG selection or something." You could just see. And I didn't realize that till later that, but that's how it is in that unit. You're like a traitor, right?
Oh,
Once you turn your
absolutely.
back,
You can only go to CAG. That's the only acceptable,
that's the only
way out.
acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
So,
die. It's okay to
yeah,
die or go to CAG.
and if you die, you better do it, admirably and for the battalion or the regiment.
So, so you finish up, and you finish up at Ranger Battalion, and you get back to group, and then you said you went to your special projects team, back to your special projects team, or
So when I first came back, I came back and I was on the E8 list.
hmm,
So coming back to be a team sergeant, and then when I got back, one of my former uh, guys that had been a former team sergeant, one of the best ones I ever had, a guy named Dave Brace, was the company sergeant major. And actually, before I came back, I had worked out while I was in Ranger Battalion. One of the things I also learned there is to use the rules in your favor and the regulations, because they're all about the regulations there. So one of the things I discovered was, because I was an SF guy and I had a requirement to maintain my language proficiency. So I worked it out, and they had no way to do that for me at Fort Benning. So I worked out for them to send me back to command language training at Fort Campbell for a month, TDY. And while I was there, I started shopping for a team sergeant job to make sure that, I had my destiny picked out when I came back. So I had linked up with my former team sergeant, who's the sergeant major of the company, and he had told me, "Listen, I've got a position for you in this company. Would you take it?" And I was like, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, there's a team I have that's gotten into some trouble. They're not doing too good. They caused an international incident.
is that
So
bad? That sounds bad.
yeah, it was bad. Not only that, they had a guy that had actually uh, died under suspicious circumstances. They don't know if it was suicide or an overdose. It was the medic on ketamine, and so he wanted, he was trying to rebuild this team, and he wanted a team sergeant to take over. He and I had worked together, and he knew me, knew that I was all about the combatives and training hard and all that. And he said, I think you'd be perfect for this. And I told him, I said, well, I'll do it, but you got to support me. You got to let me fire some guys. You got to let me kick some guys out if that needs to happen. I need some real support from you as the sergeant major. And he said, you got it. And so I came back initially, and they put me on the B team. And nobody knew that I was going to be moving over to take this team. And while I was on the B team, we did a desert deployment to Fort Bliss, to where this team was, on an exercise, and I was part of their, grading process and support package. So I got to observe them without them knowing I was going to be their team sergeant. And then after that, we came back, and then I rotated in to be the team sergeant and take over that team. And that's the team that, later I was working with Larry Corrigan on as my warrant.
So you were let's see, we got the annotation. So we're still 3-letter teams or 3-number teams. So you're on 5. What is it?
Yep.
Which team?
Five,
Which team were you on? 542. And you guys' team specialty was mobility?
Desert mobility, which, that's what I had done on the team with that the other guy was team sergeant of, the sergeant major. And so he knew that I understood desert mobility really well, especially from my time with the B500 project, and then having worked with him. And when I worked with him, we had also done a joint mission with the guys from CAG that was around desert mobility. So I'd gotten to work with them on the concepts. And so he knew I had a lot of background in that area and thought it would be a good assignment for me.
So what was that like, taking the seat and Sergeant Major's giving you this background, and you've now assessed the team, and you have to have some ideas about what you're going to have to do, and probably got a plan in your head, but we all know how planning goes.
Right.
What was it like taking what you had in your head and implementing it on? Because still at the end of the day, these are SF guys, and they've all got their own personality, and they're a team already, and you're coming in, and they're going to fight you somewhat. Even though they can't, they're going to try and fight you somewhat. How was it implementing what you needed to do?
Well, the biggest part of it was they actually weren't a team already, and that's really what was missing. And that's kind of what I saw in the fact that, they were a good team. They had some good individuals because they'd already gotten rid of the guys that had the international incident, the guys that were connected to whatever might have happened previously. And so the guys that were left were either brand new, or these other guys that had just gotten, stuck into this situation and were guilty by association. And the biggest part of what they were missing was that actual team mentality that, hey, we are an elite special forces team, and our job is to, go to combat, to win, and to be the best we can be. And so when I went into it, and I was still really, wound tight from being at the Ranger Battalion, like it or not, those things have an impact on you. I always refer to it as trading paint. So if you watch a NASCAR race, like this past weekend was the Daytona 500, the cars always rub up against each other, and they're always trading paint. So whoever you're around, you're going to trade paint with. So your goal is you always want to trade paint with superior individuals so that it rubs off on you in a positive way. But either way, you're going to get some of it. And so when I went into it, I had a lot of this Ranger paint rubbed off on me. So I was still pretty, dynamic as far as leadership is this way. And I didn't just go into it with the plan in my head. I had actually written out my plan and how I was going to approach it. And what I tried to do was pull in all the things that I had learned and been studying from all these great team sergeants I had over the years to, bring that to the team and do a good job. And so when I first got there, I knew the secret to it that I'd learned from one team sergeant was find one bad guy and fire him right away. Because a lot of times in the SF team, everybody thinks nobody can get fired. Nobody's going to get kicked out. I'm in SF. It's that government employee mentality. I've made it this far. Nobody's going to get rid of me. So I went in and I started just doing basic stuff and telling the guys, hey, this is my philosophy. This is how it's going to be. And this is what we're going to try to achieve. And our goal is to become, the best team we can possibly be. And with that, I put out standards for them. And the other thing I told them too was, hey guys, I'm going to get in here. I'm going to get you some individual schools. I'm going to make you better as individuals so we can be a better team. And my focus is going to be on fitness and PT and, and basic skills, shooting, moving, communicating. Those are all basic SF skills that we're going to master as a team. And so when I went into it with these things that had always been very basic concepts on every team I'd been into or been part of. And I just started executing that. And then as we went through that checklist, some guys tried to kind of fight me. And one of the basic things that I did when I first got there said, hey guys, everybody's going to pack up their gear in accordance with our deployment packing list. It says we're supposed to be ready to roll out in 72 hours. This is our basic load of gear individually by MOS. Everybody's going to do that. We're going to do team inspection. We're going to go through all the MOSs. Everybody's going to make sure they got all their gear. We're going to find out what we're missing, what we need, and we're going to get it. Well, I had a guy on the team that was the medic, probably the worst, position to try to challenge me. And so I had told him that, hey guys, we're going to have, a layout. And a lot of guys fought that because like, hey, we're SF guys, we're mature. You don't need to look at our stuff. I'm like, well, I don't need to, but I'm going to inspect what I expect. We're going to go through it, and that's how we're going to do it. And so we went in. I had everybody lay out their stuff on Friday morning. As soon as I checked everybody's stuff and it was good, I let them go. Well, I had one guy that didn't have his stuff together. And, I was like, hey, what's up? I said, you're missing this, this, and this. Why don't you have it? He gave me some lame excuses. And so I told him, okay, I'll reinspect you today at 5 p.m. He goes, no, I'll have it ready before that. I said, nope, we'll do it at 5 p.m. So at 5 p.m., in true Ranger Battalion status, in fashion that I learned, I came back and I took about 2 hours to go through his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, he and I never had an issue again. He realized, hey, I'm serious. I'm just trying to do a job professionally. But at the same time, the medic, his stuff was a little bit weak. And I got onto him and he decided, and I told everybody when I took over, if anybody's not happy with the changes that are about to happen, come see me and we'll find you another place in SF. And this guy came to me and said that, hey, this doesn't look right. And as a medic, I'd seen his equipment. He didn't have his stuff together. He just didn't know what he was doing, in my opinion. And so as soon as he told me that, I fired him. I went to the sergeant major. I made him get his stuff out of the team room that day. And from then on, the team realized, hey, I was serious about being professional. And, we went forward. And from then, I made sure I did everything I could to get those guys the schools they needed to advance them professionally, to make sure we started looking like a professional team that was going to get the quality missions when they came down.
Yeah. You got to go in and impress that you're serious to the guys, right? And that's with anything, it's civilian business. When you're in a management role, you have to sit down with the people and then tell them what you expect from them. And then this is maybe not a politically correct way of putting it, but sometimes you have to shoot a hostage. And
absolutely. And,
the
thing that I took out of it and had always learned is that, don't go in and just start blasting everything to make it your way. Evaluate it first. And that's why I was really glad to have that time on the B team to observe it from the outside, take notes and see what I thought needed to be changed and how I could make them, more professional. And that worked out really well. And then I knew from having seen that and my conversation with the sergeant major that I'm probably going to have to get rid of one person to make an example.
Yeah. And the guys take that seriously. It's funny, though, you say guys can't get fired. No, you can't get fired from the military very easily. That's tough. But you can get your shit in the hallway pretty quick.
Right, right. Especially with the right teams. And a lot of times guys didn't even, they didn't even get moved off the team. Teams didn't want to do that because, hey, I don't want to lose a body. We're already short, especially like a medic. Nobody wants to lose their medic. And, I decided that if I have to, I'll go back to being the medic and the team sergeant, but we're going to have a quality team. Luckily, right after that, we got a new medic that was highly motivated, that was great and professional. And the standards for the team had been set and everybody went forward with a great attitude.
Did you guys have, and I think I know the answer to this, do you guys have 18 x-rays at that point? Or was that?
At that time, I don't think we had anybody that was coming through as an 18 X-ray. I think the program had just kind of been like restarted. I
Yeah.
don't remember seeing any myself as far as the teams go. So I don't really recall exactly what the status of that program was then, but it wasn't
So,
long
but
after that it appeared again.
do you think guys missed out on something by not doing at least 2 years in the regular army and then coming over? Do you think that there's some sort of discipline or structure that they didn't see, or even the wherewithal to know how good you have it where you are now as compared to what it could be?
I think it's really a double-edged sword. I think you definitely miss out on those things you talked about as far as the experience, the appreciation. I'll be honest, I didn't have full appreciation for what it meant to be a group guy until I came back from Ranger Battalion. But when I came back, I really understood how wonderful it was to be in 5th Special Forces Group. But, along with that, I think it also brings something unique to the SF community is you have these guys that don't have these indoctrinated ideas from being in the rest of the military, and then they are absorbed into your team, and they can add a nuance that's pretty unique, because they've got this different way of thinking. Now, the key to it, I think, and what worked for me is when I got there, we had a really great mentorship process that was built into it with, seniors mentoring juniors. And even when I first showed up to SF, I didn't have a senior medic on my team, but one of the other experienced guys from down the hall came down, knew I was new, and welcomed me to the company, and said, "Hey, what can I do to help you out? Let me show you some things." Anytime I had a question, he was there to help me out, even though he wasn't directly on my team. So that mentoring process is what made it work for me. But I had some different ideas and concepts that, because I'd never been there before, I didn't have these preconceived ideas that set me in certain patterns that, could have been a disadvantage. So I think it's got unique qualities on both sides. The same way that, a lot of special operations, to include some of the tier 1 units, will accept people if they pass the selection process coming from other units that are non-combat related. Doesn't matter what your MOS is if you can pass. So you get this whole pool of ideas and thought processes that you wouldn't otherwise have to use to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, some of the guys coming through as X-rays and everything, you'd be amazed at the background that they did have. I mean, I went to selection with a guy that was a NASA rocket scientist, and he just got bored and decided he wanted to be a Green Beret. He's like, "Yeah, this is
Absolutely.
this is it. So I'm going to go do this now because it's hard." So you have that side of it, but I think that life as a private is you kind of at least need to know something about it. That's just kind of what I think, because being a private fucking sucks. And then when you come to when you're an E5 and you come to group and you kind of have this chip on your shoulder, I think it would be lessened. But everything has its positives and negatives. I just was wondering what you thought about that. It's funny you said layouts. Uh, and you being a Delta, it's not something you want somebody to come up against you with, because that's your background, right? Of being a medic. Um, I my short time in SF, I seemed that's all I did was layouts. So whenever it came to that, I got to the point at the end where the commander would just say, "Is it all there?" And yeah, and then you could see guys that didn't take that shit seriously when the commander said, "Oh, we're going to lay everything out of this team sergeant or whatever," and they'd be there for hours or days going through all their shit. And
Yeah.
that's just a basic thing, right? That's just control of all of our stuff, and that's and it seems so insignificant as you're a team guy, right? Lay out all your stuff, but that's the core basic. That's our equipment that we have to train with, and you got to be good at this. And you just as need you got to be good at shooting or good at fighting or good at tactics and things like that. That's just one of the basics.
Well, one of the things I saw is that, and I observed it, especially when I was in that B team position, watching that team before I became the team sergeant, is that some of the guys, the ones that I especially, had challenges from, that didn't do the layout, they didn't have their gear ready and they didn't have their stuff tight whenever it was time for that training mission. So I saw that, and that's when I decided, hey, look, normally I might not do a full layout, but when I saw those deficiencies, it raised a flag to me, and I said, you know what, we're going to have to take this back, and go from step one, using that basic uh, Lombardi approach to, hey, this is a football, and make sure that we know every piece, and that guys really go back and tighten up their basics because it just wasn't there.
Mm. And that transfers over to your jiu-jitsu stuff, right? Everybody wants to. What's a ridiculous move in jiu-jitsu? Like a flying armbar, right?
Flying armbar, flying triangle, those are definitely
Yeah,
ridiculous.
but they don't want to get into just I get really good at getting into a clinch, right? Once you're really good at that, then you can branch out into other stuff. But everyone wants to skip, and that's kind of with life as it is, right? You want to be able to do level 10 before you do level 1. What do you think? What do you think is the best way to impress on people to get them to understand that if you're really good at this, then you can be really good at that. But first, we need to master those things.
I think if you look at anybody that is a serious professional, anybody that's really good at whatever they do, anybody that's a master, the one thing that you'll see them do is the very basic elements of whatever that profession or that activity is. They are really good at just simple things, and that impressed upon me. And mostly it came from those Vietnam guys. They knew their basics better than anybody, and they were able to demonstrate it. And so that's kind of always, something that I've taken forward, that if you're going to be good at anything, start with the most simple tasks and the foundational elements and build on that.
Hmm. How'd you carry that over into ROTC, right? Because now you've got children, really. So you're going from a high speed, high stress unit to now I've got to go teach the future lieutenants of America um, and impress all the things I know, but in a kinder and gentler way. How was that transition for you?
So they're actually worse than children because they look like adults, and part of the time they act and speak like adults, and then you never know when they'll default to that, naive, childish decision making process to where they'll do something you would have never guessed. But the main reason that I chose the ROTC assignment was something that I had learned from those Vietnam guys is, don't just complain about something, come up with a solution. And one of the things and one of the reasons that I mentioned that I left SF at the time was because of the incident that happened with the guys in Afghanistan, and I saw some disheartening things from certain leadership to where these guys, the reason it all happened, in my opinion, is because some guys wanted to get their combat, their CIB badge, and work their way to general instead of focusing on the team and what the team should be doing. And the guys that paid the price were the enlisted guys that were doing their job and doing putting themselves out there. So I chose ROTC so I could have an impact on the Army's future leadership. So when I went back, that was one of the things that I looked at it and had the approach to to kind of go after it. And so I went into it recognizing that, hey, they're kids and they just don't know. And I used a lot of reference to when I was a guy coming off the street trying to go SF. And really, the officer system for ROTC, it's about the same. You're trying to go from being a civilian to out doing dynamic leadership things in the Army. And it kind of gave me some insight to all the holes I had in my program. So what I did was I went into it trying to get them to focus on those basics, the basic components, their leadership, and to make sure that they were taking it seriously, that they weren't just a college kid having fun, going to the Army, getting their education paid for, but they knew they were going into it because they were going to fight. And luckily, the folks that I had, the young adults that were going to do it, were very serious. And actually, I lost two of my cadets later to combat in Iraq on separate occasions, and they were magnificent leaders. And I got to say, of all the people that I lost or was connected to that were killed in combat. Those were the two that I took the hardest because, you as an SF guy, you kind of expect that, hey, this could happen. Everybody accepts it. But then you have these young people that you nurture and they're almost like your kids. And then it happens to them. And you always wonder, hey, did I give them enough information to prevent it?
Yeah, they're like your kids, right?
Very
And
much.
you're teaching them all that because it took you a whole career, right, to gain all this experience to pass on to them, and it's like a father-child relationship. Uh, and for us, we we became every step of the way was another desensitization. It desensitizes you to the fact that a lot of the things we do can kill you. Jumping out of planes, handling live explosives, live fire on the range, even the mount training and all this other stuff. You can catch a wheel in a ditch, flip the vehicle over, and roll it over on the guys, and you're just driving down the road. So it is more of an accepted thing that you can die at any time, and you kind of become desensitized to it. But yeah, I can see where that would be disheartening. How many years did you do the? Were you a instructor for the ROTC?
I did it for my last 3 years.
Three
So
years.
in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't very long. But, like you
Yeah.
said, you do get desensitized. When I first got there, coming straight from SF, and right before that, having been in the Ranger Battalion, definitely desensitized from my time in the Ranger Battalion about what can happen because the soldiers there, they're basically very expendable. You hate to lose them, but you know what? They'll be replacements. They're easily replaced. We'll get more, and they're all about doing whatever it takes, no matter what the cost to the individual, to get the mission done. And everybody recognizes that. So when you go into it from the college perspective of these folks are in college one day, in the Army the next, you've only got a short time to try to get them to be focused on the idea that they're going to be the leaders in the Army and they're going to be responsible for these young people's lives whenever they go to those units.
Yeah, that's that is a shock, right? Because they're kids, and then they're going to be responsible right away for 20 people, 30 people. They're going to be platoon leaders, and they're going to have that E7 trying to, you know, corral them and get them to do the right thing. I'm going to speak at Virginia Tech in April. What's like one thing that you would say that from your understanding of ROTC and how to that I should try to impress on them in the way that because I'm going to give them my view on things from SF and things and the route. What's one thing that you would try to impress on a group of ROTC cadets that you're going to speak to?
The biggest thing I used to always try to connect with my ROTC students was that you're going in as the officer and it's your responsibility to form a partnership with your NCO. And that the best thing you can do is to listen to your NCO and, and learn how to interact with the NCO so that you guys are a true team. And the one thing I used to tell them is remember that NCOs are programmed to help you as an officer. So ask them for help. And I used to always impart to them that, hey, if you want an NCO's help, take him to breakfast, take him to lunch, because we're all about food, and that's the
Yeah.
that's the secret is take them out to eat and explain to them that you realize that there's a lot you don't know, there's a lot that they do know, and you want to have that knowledge that they can share, and then at the same time, I think it's important for crusty old NCOs like I was to realize that this new energy coming into the organization forces you to kind of stay young and stay unique in your perspective and not just settle for the way things have always been.
Hmm. Be humble, right? You got to be humble when you go into the new thing.
And both
And
ways.
and yeah, and but also to understand, right? You say crusty old NCO, but I mean, he'll have E7s in 7 years in some units, 7 years all the way up to a 20-year NCO that's still a platoon sergeant. So you could get
Right.
any range from somebody that's not that much older than you to somebody that's going to retire soon. So I guess to see to be aware of your surroundings, of who you're dealing with also.
Yeah, and you may not always get the dynamic mentor that you deserve if you're coming to a unit and you're getting one of those NCOs, unfortunately. But it's still your responsibility to go in there as a leader and find out what they have to offer you and figure out how you can use that to have the best platoon or the best, detachment or unit that you are in charge of.
So before that, your team sergeant. Did you take your team to combat, or did you go in a different capacity?
So I didn't get to go with 542 because uh, everything happened later. 9/11 happened while I was part of the special projects team. So we
Right.
actually, things were a lot different in that aspect.
Okay. I saw in your uniform you had I think it's combat medics badge. Where did you get that from?
Desert Storm.
You got that one at Desert Storm. Any fun stories behind that, or just react to contact?
A lot of it was we had some interesting times. We had one episode where we geared up to go look for or to set up an LZ inside enemy territory to have several Iraqi helicopters with high-ranking generals land and defect. And then, as it turned out, it never happened. They never came. Not sure what happened. And then we also had, a search for some missing journalists that were captured, to where we did some cross-border ops to look for them. But the most action we had was whenever we actually went into Kuwait to retake Kuwait, and we breached a minefield and then moved to that military city that I talked about, and then we actually went into the city and captured all those Iraqis. And the interesting part is, at the time I was a medic, but I was also the 50 gunner on the M113 because I was one of the few guys that knew how to shoot the 50.
Do you feel like that was something that you had to have happen as an SF guy to go to combat, to actually play chess with the things that you, looking back on it now, or is it just one of the things that just happened and it was in the course of your career?
I think looking back on it, I'd already been on this unique trip to Pakistan, and actually the trip to Pakistan was more SF than the time in Desert Storm, because it was working in this different capacity with indigenous personnel, and it was a classified mission at the time. While I was there, we were in a near scud attack on the city. We had a car bomb go off about a block in front of us and devastated the whole city, or not the city, but the whole city block. And then also during that mission, we had one of our guys, because we were doing demining. One of the things we were tasked to do is we used to go to a city in Pakistan known as Dara, which is the weapons bazaar. And we would actually go down there and purchase landmines and then bring them back to the house we were living in, make them inert, and use them as training aids. Well, during that process, one of our engineers went a little too far, messing with the fuse of an anti-tank mine, and blew his hand off. And so I got to treat him. I had to treat him when that happened because I was the closest guy there. And so a lot of the things that happened in that particular operation had already made me feel like an actual SF guy. The time in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia for Desert Storm, Desert Shield, kind of added to it, and it gave me like a different perspective as far as what combat is, because it gave me more of a conventional look at things. And spending all that time out in the desert doing those mini reconnaissance missions, and then that day when we actually went across the border in this massive line of armored vehicles as far as you can see in both directions, it was kind of more descriptive of like what you saw of the old World War II battles when they were going into Normandy, because as far as you could see, there was this immense force moving in the desert to go take this objective. So it between the two, it gave me this really unique perspective on uh, what being SF could be, and did mean, especially to me personally. So I think it's an experience I definitely wouldn't trade. At the time, it was definitely one of those eye-opening things about how things never go the way you expect on either one of those missions. There are always these twists and turns that you could not have anticipated. So it was all part of that, experience. Experience being what you get when you don't get what you want.
What's that feeling like of being part of this big operation and possibly going into a situation where guys will die? What's that feeling like of stepping off on that?
Oh, what at the time? I mean, it was terrifying because one, you felt underinformed. You definitely felt like you weren't an important piece of the operation. Like a lot of times when you're doing SF things, you feel like you've got total support. You feel like you're the focus of things, and that you're going to be taken care of, and you're going to get the backup you need, and you'll be taken care of. But on this, you kind of felt like, hey, you're just thrown in there with the Saudis because maybe they didn't know what else to do with you, and your job is to call Cass and get them where they need to go. It kind of felt a little bit like babysitting. So it wasn't necessarily the great mission that you had always dreamed of in SF, but it turned out to be some valuable experience for sure.
Obviously, your perspective from when you started on the career and going into the SF to where you ended, it's a big arc. You've been all over the place and done a lot of cool things. And one thing we do is, as especially in our field, is we minimize all of the crazy shit that we did. Because you start listing off all of this shit, and
Right.
to a normal person, that sounds ridiculous, right? How did your how did your perspective from the beginning towards the end change? And then looking back, did you accomplish everything that you wish you would, or did you do everything you wanted to do?
Well, I was lucky that one team sergeant that wouldn't let the captain talk to, or wouldn't let us talk to the captain. One of the things he told us was, "Hey guys, make sure you take plenty of pictures because you're not going to believe all the stuff that you do." And he was absolutely right. I took as many as I could, but I always look back at those, and because we didn't have the camera phones back in those days, I look at it and I always realize that what, he was right, and some of the best moments I didn't capture because we're too busy doing real action stuff, and so I got no clear memories of those. But I always look back on it, and the thing that I remember is that it went by way too fast. One minute I was a E4 with an SF tab, and the next minute I was, like now I'm a retired old guy, like they say, a fag, a former action guy. And so, uh, it happens in the blink of an eye. And it's kind of one of those things that you're like, man, I didn't get enough of it. And I also realize that's part of the addiction that comes with it. And I always tell everybody that I'm a recovering Green Beret because I'm still addicted to the process. I'll always have that issue, and all I can do is go one day at a time without it.
Yeah, the that is one thing that pisses me off is I'll run into guys that were before phones and they have hundreds of pictures of all the shit they did, and I have like seven. Uh, and I just never took my phone out and took pictures of anything I was doing. And you're right, though. You when you're in the life and living it, you don't think about that you're actually in the good old days right now doing it, and it goes by. I mean, I was in 8 years. It was 8 minutes, and I was out. And
Yeah.
now, and everybody I talk to is the same way. Yeah, I enlisted, and then oh shit, how did I get here? I'm done now. Um, but that is, yeah. You say that did you go by too fast? Do you miss it when you think
You know
back on
what?
it?
I miss the guys. That's the
Yeah,
best part is the guys that you get to work with, the guys that you get to be around. They're they're the epitome of America. And so it's always cool. I still keep in touch with a lot of the guys. And then unfortunately, I'm at the period where you start to see that a lot of them are passing on. And you realize, man, what great people I got to be in the presence of. And then I'm always thankful that hopefully that trading paint, I got to get a lot of it to rub off on me from those guys, because that was really the best part. And I absolutely miss that part of being with the guys. I try to be realistic and look back and remember some of the things that we had to put up with were definitely unpleasant. The times when we were sitting around waiting to go on missions. And fifth group has a wonderful thing every year in September where they have Legion Week, which is
Yeah.
it's their alumni gathering, and they've done a great job of bringing guys back in. And I've been to a couple of those, and it's always awesome to go back and see that the guys now, they have everything we always dreamed of and never got to get, and
Yeah.
and I think that's great for them. But at the same time, I always wonder, did they miss out on some of the experiences because they didn't have to, make things happen without it? And they're still great guys. They're still the best in the world. And, it's great to go back to those events, see the new generation and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then also run into guys that you haven't seen in years and sit back and share some of your own old war stories.
Yeah, making shit happen without the correct support, right? That's a key a characteristic of SF guys. And I think that even happens now. Is
It
the
probably
guys
has to.
they have all this shit in the world now with the new everything on base, but I still think that there's times, and I know there's times where they don't have exactly what they need, and they just make it happen. Do
Right. That's
you?
that's the best thing about SF guys.
Yeah, it yeah, we're living in the worst barracks in the worst part of post, and the stuff that the Air Force gave back because it's condemned, but it's okay for Army personnel. Uh, did you? So you were out. Well, okay. So I'm working on this chart, right, and it's the different eras of Green Berets, and they kind of cross one another. You've got your Vietnam guys, and then post-Vietnam guys, where you kind of enlisted in there, right? And then there was the guys that came in while Desert Storm and post Desert Storm, and then you get into the global war on terror generation. Do you look at the global war on terror generation of Green Berets and think about what it would have been like if you had started your career late, or if you were younger and you had started later, and how different things would be of serving in that generation? Do you think about the actually going and doing all this and getting bogged down in Afghanistan? Do you think about what it would have been like to have been a Green Beret in that era at all?
No, not really. I mean, to be honest, I fondly remember the time I had. And then one of the things I think that guys struggle with, and a big issue for a lot of guys is, we lose our identity whenever we leave the military, especially SF. And I think if you sit back and you think about, coulda, woulda, shoulda, then that only makes it worse.
Yeah.
And so, I believe it's one of the challenges that a lot of guys have when they get out, and why we have, so many negative things happen with a lot of our guys that get out, is because of that, hanging on to what could have been. And, I miss it, but I feel like I got to do pretty much, a little bit of everything. I didn't get enough of all of it, probably. And I also look at it and go, you know what, that was meant to be that way. And it was probably for my own good. And I'm just thankful that I was a part of all the things I got to be involved in, and that I got to see so much of it, like you said, from all the way of post-Vietnam through Desert Storm, to include that, covert ops in Central America in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and then into those later stages, and a glimpse of the global war on terrorism with the guys, changing gears and doing that. And I feel like for me, my timing was perfect, and I shouldn't question it.
What was one moment in all of that 23 years where you kind of just sat back and thought to yourself, I can't believe I get paid to do this?
Probably, one of the best trips I was ever on is we went on a joint training mission to Kenya. And when I went, I was a medic at the time, so I was part of the medical readiness effort that they were doing, which is the humanitarian side of this joint operation with the Kenyan Army. And while we were there, we were camped out on the plains. And I remember waking up every morning and walking out and basically being loose in the zoo. Because, there were all these giraffes and zebras and, antelopes and everything just scattered across the plain right across from our tents. So I remember looking at that and just thinking, wow, I can't believe I get paid to do this and this is my job. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Charlie's told me a story about that. He was
Yeah.
out one morning and he sees a guy running the opposite direction. So what does he do? He starts running as well, and these elephants are starting to stampede over him, and they're in the middle of the desert. It's like, oh, I didn't expect this to happen this morning.
Yeah, so I got a great picture. One morning during that operation, I actually got up, walked out of the camp over to a bush to kind of use the bathroom, and I heard this kind of unusual little snort noise. I turned about 45 degrees one way, and I saw a bull elephant probably within 75 feet of me. And at the time, I had a 9mm pistol, which would probably do nothing except make him mad. And I had it. I had my LBE vest on, and I had a camera in it. And I pulled the camera out, and I decided I would take a picture so everybody would know how I died. And took the picture, and the snap really, the camera was one of the older models, and it actually, had a nice click to it. And when that happened, the elephant kind of, got a little more agitated, started to come toward me a little bit, started fanning his ears. And I was pretty sure at that time that he was going to trample me. But I stayed there mostly out of fear. And then I started to back away slowly. And then a couple steps into that, he finally turned and started to walk away. And I got another really great picture of him that was even closer. And, to this day, that's one of the great memories that I have from SF, is that I survived that encounter with the elephant.
It's just another normal day in the SF guy life
Exactly.
of,
Right.
oh, hey man, you're at Chow. I almost got killed by an elephant. Can you pass the salt?
Right. Exactly.
So full career, did everything you wanted to do. Now it comes time to transition out. Did you drop your retirement packet from ROTC?
Yes. While I was there, I turned down sergeant major twice, going to the sergeant major's academy, because I
Why'd you
knew
do that?
I I was done with the Army. Like I
Okay.
said, after the experience with the leadership at the time, I really just didn't, I didn't see myself going forward and doing that. I was really disheartened based on what I'd seen with the leadership. And I just decided, hey, you know what, I've done enough. I was in the ROTC position. I didn't want to be a sergeant major. I selfishly enjoyed being an operations guy. I got 2 tours as a team sergeant, which doesn't usually happen, and both great experiences. And I just didn't want to. I didn't want to go back and be a sergeant major. And so I decided, hey, you know what? It's time to get out. And mainly it was because I was focused on spending that time with my son.
Yeah. Well, it's a sacrifice, right? Every next level or next thing you have to sacrifice. And I've said before, a lot of SF guys will sacrifice their family many times
Right.
over just to stay on a team or go to the next level. And sometimes they'll put their family fourth or fifth in front of everything.
I
And that,
done that the first time. I did not want to do
yeah,
it again.
yeah, lessons learned there, right? So we make the decision to get out. What was that transition like? Did you have a plan? Because you started the gym pretty soon afterwards. Did you have, because you're away from base and you're away from the flagpole kind of at ROTC. Did you have more of an integration into normal society already than most guys do? Because when they leave base, they're kind of lost right away. It's a new world for them. Were you a little more prepared to get out?
I think so because being in that academic environment at the University of Georgia, but still wearing the uniform, it was kind of like being, when prisoners get released and they go to a halfway house and
Work
they're
release.
right. So that's kind of, it was a better way, I think, to transition. But at the same time, it was one of those things. Did I have a plan? Not specifically, not initially, but I had thought about, hey, I want to be in business for myself, maybe. And I definitely knew I wanted to spend that time with my son. And I started thinking about, well, how do I do it? And while I was at the University of Georgia and the ROTC department, I was teaching military combatives to the cadets, and they really responded well to it. They enjoyed it. And then I found that, hey, that's something that I really enjoyed, was sharing that with them. And then I just decided that, hey, you know what? Maybe I could do this as a job. And once again, it's kind of like when I came in the Army to start with, I was naive about what I was getting into, and especially running a business, because I had no clue how to run a business whatsoever. And like I mentioned, working for the government, you don't know how to make money, and you don't look at things the same way. But I decided that, you know what, if I could help take over countries and overthrow foreign governments and do all these things, maybe I could run a business. And when I first started, I tried to be a businessman, and that was the wrong approach, because I'm not a businessman. And I finally figured out that the way for me to be successful at it was to approach it as a new SF mission for me. So that's what I did. I started doing everything the way I did when I was a team sergeant, when I ran a team, when I was operating that way. And eventually that actually became one of my other businesses. That's the I call it Going Commando Success Coaching, and where I work with a lot of other businesses. And I just did a thing at the University of Georgia with one of their entrepreneur boot camps. I've done a couple iterations of that, to where I go there and teach them all the things I learned, by making mistakes, really, in the business world.
Speaking of mistakes, so you get out, and as well as I do, did you have the abusive relationship with alcohol that a lot of guys fall into after they get out? And why do you think that happens?
So, uh, when I first got out, I was still drinking, right? I did drink. I drank. Luckily, I drank alcohol socially, and it wasn't the same once I left the team. While I was at the University of Georgia, I managed to pull some strings and get another SF guy from Fifth Group, a captain, to come down here. And so he and I were partners in crime at the University of Georgia. And if you're in the college environment, especially a party school like UGA, then they do their best to rival the military community with their drinking exploits. That's just how it is. So drinking was still a part of what I was doing, but it wasn't the same, because you didn't have the team. So there was only two of us here as SF guys, so we would still have a few drinks, but it wasn't quite the same. And at one point after I got out, I was having a lot of stomach issues, and what I didn't realize at the time is it was really stress. It was a lot of stress from actually getting out, trying to, make my way, owning a business and all that. And part of what I did to try to fix it was I stopped drinking. And I quit drinking for a while. And then once I realized that, I think I had like one drink after that a couple years later. And I realized, you know what? I feel so good without it. Why would I ever go back? And since then, I really haven't drank. It just doesn't appeal to me anymore. But I think a lot of guys hang on to that. And I think I read this somewhere lately, is that people will hang on to the pain of something because it's the last remnants you have of a great life. And so I think that drinking and camaraderie, because it was such a part of being an SF, a lot of times it's connected to the great feelings you had being part of that team, being part of that network, and having all those people around you. And I think sometimes people try to hang on to it as a result, and then it turns down a bad path. It becomes self-medicating. It becomes a substitute to escape all these other feelings that aren't so good, right? And then, you talk about having the TBI, and I know one of the things that I look at lately is and realizes that when you start keeping track of maybe all the head injuries and all the things you were exposed to, you don't think about it. And then you start counting them up and you realize, man, this could be an issue for me as well that I never considered. And, for guys that are a little older, I think it creates some fear that at some point I'm going to be this angry, rampaged old man that has a TBI that I didn't even recognize. And so, you start to look at those things and you try to hang on to the past. And sometimes the way you hang on to it is with things like the alcohol.
Yeah. I think the hidden, it's becoming more coming more to the surface, the traumatic brain injuries, but the hidden killer for guys like us, uh, just a constant, and then because you hurt yourself and you just disregard it as a headache or stressed out or something else. But then you get another one, and you get another one, and you get another one. Guys will fire too many Carl Gustavs out of them.
Yeah.
You're only supposed to fire a couple. They'll fire 30 out because they're getting, they're going to die. Well, you make it through that, and your brain's rattled. Even
Yeah.
yeah, anything,
Right.
training, shit like that. So, I'm sober. I can't drink anymore. I just can't do it. One day I had to give it up. So it's unfortunate. And then, but guys will deal with that stress while they're in or getting out of the stress of the team or losing members or losing guys with that, and they'll self-medicate and they'll drive themselves down a deep hole. It's really unfortunate, but that's good to hear that you kind of didn't push that direction. But I'm getting from a lot of the guys is that stuff has gone wrong for them, and they've made it even worse for themselves by
Right.
putting it off till tomorrow, and then putting it off till tomorrow, and then it just gets out of control.
I was really lucky because the jujitsu lifestyle that's connected to, especially the Gracie family, they have a thing called the Gracie diet, and one of the aspects of it is no alcohol. And so, I always fought that one for a while in the beginning because I was like, that's that's great for them, but that's not who I am. I'm going to have a drink. And then once I quit and decided that, hey, you know what, I feel much better without it, I started to incorporate more of that concept. And so it became part of my other lifestyle. And I was lucky enough to pick something that mirrors a lot of what we have in special forces. So, because I chose to run a jiu-jitsu academy, it's very similar in some ways to that military connection. So I come in every day. Um, a lot of times I would come in PT clothes. I would change into a uniform. Now it's a jujitsu uniform, not a military uniform. Then change back to go home. So it was a lot like my lifestyle. There's a rank thing that it's very informal, which makes it like SF. You got your core group of people that are your friends that you do things with. You're always training. You're trying to get better. You're pushing yourself physically. So all these aspects were really connected to that same structure of lifestyle that I had when I was in special forces.
It's like you got your little family now, right? You created a business where the people want to be there. They're coming in because they want you to teach them something, and you've created your own little team room, right? Where,
Absolutely. We actually have our own kind of a team room. If you saw it, you would go, man, this is a team room.
well,
Guaranteed.
if I make it down there, I'll come and check it out.
I
But
hope you come
uh,
by. We'd love to have you.
yeah, I'd love to come down. And then fitness for a lot of the guys, and it is for me. I'm addicted to it. I just traded one thing for a healthier option. Like that's all I do is work out and train. So I get what you mean there, and it's a good outlet. It sure is a lot healthier than drinking myself to death.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so how is it now being a veteran and you've done all this crazy shit? And when you introduce yourself to people, do they expect more from you based on your past?
You know what? I don't know if they do or not. I mean, I think more than anything, when I introduce myself, I expect more from myself than a lot of the folks that I'm going to meet. So I think I try to bring that to the table all the time anyway. And, nothing discourages me more or upsets me than when I see veterans out that aren't living up to some kind of standard. Even if I see people out on the road that aren't driving that great, they're hogging up the passing lane and they got veteran plates. It just infuriates me because I'm like, you're a veteran, you should do better, right?
Yeah.
But so
They're, yeah, to live up to social expectations, right? And to your own, because we were this certain level of role model when we were in, right? And we still need to live up to that in our veteran lives. And we're not broken. We don't need to be this looked down upon or taken care of. We should live up to what we used to be.
yeah, and I think you talk about guys struggling when they get out, and I know this was a problem for me. Is when you get out, especially as an SF guy, you've always been this quiet professional. And we talked about it a little bit earlier that, now you got to try to promote yourself, especially in business, or even just introducing yourself and trying to network for any reason. And so you got to find this way to, to deal with what you've always had ingrained in you about being the quiet professional. And as a result, you don't always portray yourself in the best light, I don't think, because you leave a lot of key stuff out that I think, people would appreciate. And so it's very tricky. I know I've struggled with it, but also when you get out, a lot of guys, and this has been my issue, is you don't necessarily want to take full advantage of all the veterans' benefits. I know I didn't, especially,
Mhm.
like the medical and the disability. And part of it is you don't necessarily want to be connected to those labels, even though you earned them with your blood, sweat, and tears and scars in a lot of cases. And so sometimes guys, and I know I'm guilty of this, you steer away from it and you don't even get the benefits you deserve because you don't want to accept that, hey, there was damage done. And
Yeah.
that, you've got to carry that with you. But at the same time, when you interact with the rest of the world, uh, that's not the part of yourself that you want them to see.
I think a lot of guys have imposter syndrome also.
Yeah,
Is they
absolutely.
don't believe that they're worthy of what they accomplished and they give it to the next guy. And
I think I
there's
may be
tons of,
guilty of that exactly. Is that you don't feel like I know all these guys that made much bigger sacrifices, had it much worse than I did, seen a lot more combat, and then when you look at it and go, okay, should I get any type of disability for PTSD or any of this? And it sometimes you include yourself with that imposter syndrome as somebody who may not deserve it. And then you hear about other folks that they're getting all this 100% disability for carpal tunnel syndrome from being an admin clerk. And so it's one of those things it's hard, and I'm trying to reconcile with it right now to maybe look at getting my benefits reevaluated and getting some of that.
um, side note, I don't think I told you, I'm an ambassador for the Green Beret Foundation, and we have VSOs, and it's free for Green Berets to apply for help through the foundation, and they'll go through and go after a higher rating for you if you want to go that route.
I would love to talk to one of them because I know I need help in that area because it's something that I'm not good at.
I can send you all the stuff that you need to do to get signed up for it after this. So,
I'd really appreciate that. And the other thing is, I don't know who will watch this, but hopefully somebody will see that and realize that the guys deserve to check into those benefits and get them because so many people are getting them for far less than what the guys in SF have accomplished. And there's no way you were in SF for any amount of time and you didn't do enough to deserve those benefits.
well, you talk about being a quiet professional, right? You're quiet and reserved, but that's my role now. Is me forcing myself out into socials where people will meet me. Oh, I know Nick. Oh, Nick can help me with that, and I can get you hooked up with the foundation or guys, especially in our field. I'm out there and I want people to know me so that I can help them get to where they want to be or help them speak about things they want to talk about or just talk about whatever the hell they want to help them out in the process. So that's, forcing yourself out because we had all these skills in the team room, right? And
Right.
now we got to get out and you got to be loud. You got to because if nobody can hear you, nobody's going to know who you are on this side. So that's my hope, is to try and be a resource to guys, because I have very few of the answers, but I do know a lot of the people that have the rest of them at this point. And
Well,
hopefully this platform or things can lead to that.
it's one of those things where I think as SF guys, we don't do a very good job. We give the SEALs a hard time because they're all writing books and talking about their exploits and everything. But you know what? They do a really good job of promoting each other once they
Yeah.
leave the military, and explaining to the world, and showcasing the skill set that they have. And, not to take anything away from them, but I'd venture to say that the guys, that wear the Green Beret can match them with so many skills and show them so many things they never thought of. And our guys don't get that credit because of the way we employ this quiet professional brand.
Yeah. Well, the Marines do the best job of that, right? Everybody knows the Marines, the commercials,
They
and
got
they're
the best in the
this
uniform.
best yeah, best uniform, best publicist. They're this brotherhood. Like, they have their birthday every year. They're going around telling each other happy birthday. They're very supportive of one another, and I
Right.
think a lot of services and different units are not like that. They're very competitive and kind of they're always fighting for that little spot, or just not even fighting for the spot, just being quiet and fading off into the background. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that's our responsibility, to have the network and get guys out into the world and show what other people are doing. So what's the name of your gym again?
Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Athens.
Graciejiujitsuathens. And you guys are 20 years, man. Did you think 20 years ago when you started that you'd be sitting here today talking about your 20th anniversary?
Not even. It's been just like the SF time. It was a blink, and it's all kind of going really fast. I never would have imagined that it was something that I was going to do for this long. Uh, I kind of just got started at it one day at a time, and I was so busy in the beginning figuring out like what to do, that next thing I know, I was 10 years into it and finally starting to figure out how to do it. And then since then, it's just kind of continued to be like that roller coaster. It hit the top and it's been screaming downhill ever since.
It sucks that experience takes so long to get, right? And
Yeah.
and
And
then
I
once you
thought
get it
it would take longer.
right, well, you look great. I mean, you're 60 now, right?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
And you got into a field that's got to keep you young, because you're rolling around with kids that are much younger and faster. So now you're old age and what is it called? Whatever
Deviousness.
it is. Yeah, it can really take advantage of youth and vigor. So I got a couple questions here that I ask everybody. What what's your response to thank you for your service?
Well, you know what? I just say thank you, or I say, well, thank you for your support. Um, the one thing that I get from it is I realize that I'm lucky enough to accept all those comments and all that gratitude that should have been given to those guys from the Vietnam era. And so I realize that I just accept it because, one, if I'm aloof about it, or if I'm an ass about it, then all I do is reflect badly on all the veterans that deserve that appreciation. And so I try to just be, magnanimous about it, even though I definitely probably don't deserve all the gratitude. There's so many other guys that I know that, earned it far more than I did. So I just try to accept it for everybody that I know really, really deserves it, and appreciate the fact that people have that type of patriotic spirit.
I like that, accepting it as a whole, right? Because you served in your early years with predominantly SF guys, or Vietnam era guys, and
Yeah,
they did
initially,
not get any of that until well into the 90s.
yeah, not at all.
So that is interesting. I like that. So yeah, accepting it for as a whole of what we all were a part of. I like that. What's the one characteristic that sets operators apart from conventional forces?
Tenacity. Above everything else, like I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to get an SF guy to do something is tell him it can't be done or you can't do it. And I think that's the one thing that SF guys always have beyond most other people is they just don't give up.
Yeah. It's a long road. The whole it's a difficult process. And I'm glad you stayed in because at one point you were ready to get out and you had all that learning and experience ahead of you.
I was so ready to get out. I used to carry around an actual paper list of all the reasons that I was going to ETS and get out on after that first enlistment. I was that convinced that's what I was going to do.
Well, here we are, right? Did you
Right.
think when you had that list in your pocket that you'd be sitting here talking to me today?
Never dreamed of it. Like I said, I was focused in on all those reasons that SF wasn't for me, the military wasn't for me, and what I learned more than anything was I hadn't grown into it yet. I was I was blessed to be there before I should have been.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's the way it takes us. You can't affect when you're born, right?
Exactly.
What is the one moment of your career that you wish you could go back and relive?
Oh man, I don't know if it's a specific moment, but I would have to say it was that time as a team sergeant.
Yeah,
There's no greater honor, no greater pleasure, no greater endeavor in the military process than to be the team sergeant and lead a group of elite NCOs and preparing for whatever the world's going to throw at you.
I've got a guy coming on recording in a couple weeks. His name's Tom Kelly. Yeah, Tom Kelly. I just got his book off of Amazon. It's the A Team Sergeant's Handbook. I'll uh, I'll send you the link to it, and you can take a look at it
Okay.
if you want to. If you're up for some GB reading, it's a handbook. Got into it last night, and it's pretty comprehensive. So I'm sure he'd be interested to hear your perspective of it too.
I would love to check it out because, like I said, my other business now is based on that whole idea, the going commando success coaching. It's all about taking those lessons you learn in the military, especially in special forces. And a lot of them aren't formal lessons. They're these ad hoc things that you get from all these great mentors and sharing them with people on how you can effectively use that to run businesses and to affect your leadership in any capacity for a civilian career.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll introduce you to, and I'll send you that link after this as well.
Great.
Uh, what is the best piece of advice that you received during your career?
The best piece of advice. It might have been take as many pictures as possible.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
either that or don't believe your own bullshit.
yeah. Because you're a terrible advisor, right? You're going to tell yourself what you want to hear.
Yes, exactly. And I think that might be it's one of those two to where you have to stop and think about your perspective on things because it's always skewed.
Yeah, yeah. That's or the team environment helps out a little bit, and they go, "Ah, that's bullshit."
Yeah, they'll
All right,
always tell you.
last one is what were you afraid of then, and what are you afraid of now?
Um, then for sure, afraid of heights, and still afraid of heights, and have done a lot of things that involve heights and being in high places and all that kind of stuff. But and another good piece of advice is that one of the Vietnam guys told me is you don't have to like it, you just got to do it. And so
Yeah,
um, that was probably the biggest thing. And then I think the other one is running out of time because there's so many things that you want to do, and you have to remember, just like they tell everybody in SFAS, that it's a graded exercise, and life is a graded exercise of unknown duration and unknown standard, and you got to do the best you can, and you don't know when it's going to be done, and if you did well enough.
yeah. We were always being assessed, right?
Yeah,
I
the
was
ultimate.
messaging a guy last night about that when we were talking about rifle PT at selection or something, and you're out there just rolling around going, when is this going to end? And how hard do I have to try? Well, I better try as hard as I can. But if I can't do that as long as possible, well, I guess I'll just die then.
Right.
Yeah, there's always somebody watching. Well, Randy, that time flew by. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I will get you all of those links and information that I said you would. Do you got anything for me?
No, I appreciate you having me on. Hopefully, we'll get a chance at some point in the future to link up in person and talk some more. If you need anything on the side of the podcast, if I can help you out, let me know. Because like I said, that's one of the things I think sometimes is missing in our SF community. Is we talk a lot about the brotherhood, but we don't always do everything we can to support each other. So if you need me, let me know.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate that. And well, thanks for coming on. Bye,
All right,
everybody.
have a good one.